The March wind cut across Travis County like a knife, carrying the smell of dry earth and distant rain that would never come. Jack Monroe stood at the edge of his wife's grave, a man carved from the same hard clay as the land around him. 48 years old, two sons, 420 acres of Texas ranch land, and a hole in his chest where Linda used to be. The cemetery sat on a low hill 2 miles outside Liberty Hill, surrounded by scrub oak and mesquite that bent perpetually eastward from decades of wind. Below, the town spread out in that particular pattern of small Texas settlements, buildings clustered around a courthouse square like wagons circled against the wilderness. Population 1,200. Everyone knew everyone. Everyone knew Jack Monroe had buried his wife that morning. The casket was already lowered. Linda Mae Bennett Monroe, born 1928, died 1973. 45 years old. Too young, too fast. Cancer didn't care about fair. It had started in her breast and spread like wildfire through prairie grass, taking lung and liver and bone until there was nothing left but pain and morphine dreams. The last year had been a catalog of losses. First her hair from the chemotherapy, then her strength, unable to walk from bedroom to kitchen without resting. Then her weight, dropping from 130 to 94 to finally 87 pounds at the end. Then her clarity, the morphine taking her mind in exchange for dulling the agony. She'd looked at Jack in those final days without recognition, called him by her father's name, asked for children who'd been grown for years. The medical bills had arrived like a second disease. Chemotherapy at $300 per treatment, hospital stays at $50 per day, specialists in Austin who charged $100 just to look at her. Jack had sold the good tractor, the one his father had bought new, had sold half the cattle herd, had taken out a second mortgage on equipment, had watched his savings disappear like water in sand. In the end, it hadn't mattered. She died anyway. And Jack was left with $22,000 in old debt and $17,000 in new, and a ranch that barely generated enough income to service the interest. Ben stood to his father's left, 24 years old, in a suit that cost more than Jack made in a month. Houston money, petroleum engineering money, the kind of money that made a young man forget where he came from. His shoes were too shiny for a funeral, polished leather that had never seen honest dirt. Luke stood to the right, 21 and still dressed like he belonged to the land. Boots with actual wear on them, jeans that had been washed 100 times, a borrowed sport coat that pulled tight across shoulders built from throwing hay bales. He was the one who'd stayed, the one who worked cattle alongside his father while Ben calculated petroleum reserves in air-conditioned offices. The preacher finished his words, and the small crowd dispersed toward their trucks, offering those brief touches on the shoulder that rural men give instead of hugs. Jack remained still, watching the cemetery workers move in with shovels. He'd insisted on staying for this part. Linda deserved to be seen all the way down. She'd fought the cancer for 14 months. 14 months of watching her disappear, piece by piece, until the woman who taught him to dance at a county fair in 1949 weighed 87 pounds and couldn't remember his name. The medical bills had taken everything they'd saved. The funeral would take most of what was left. Ben touched his elbow. "Dad, we should go." Jack didn't move. The workers began filling the grave, each shovelful of earth landing with a sound like inevitability. "Dad, I heard you." The three of them walked to Jack's truck, a 1964 Ford F-100 that burned oil and leaked coolant from a crack Jack kept meaning to fix. Ben's rental car sat nearby, a new Chevrolet Impala in metallic green that looked like it belonged in a different decade, which Jack supposed it did. They drove back to the ranch in silence, following the county road north through land that had looked the same for 100 years. Cattle behind barbed wire, windmills turning slow circles against white sky. The occasional ranch house set back from the road, surrounded by the trucks and tractors and accumulated debris of agriculture. The Monroe place appeared after the 5th Cattle Guard, a white farmhouse his grandfather had built in 1898. 2 stories, wraparound porch, paint that needed touching up. Behind it spread the buildings that made a rancher work. Barn, machine shed, cattle pens built from railroad ties and welded pipe. And beyond that, the land itself. 420 acres that rolled away toward the horizon in shades of brown and tan and the faded green of winter grass. Jack had taken it over from his father in 1972, just 14 months ago. The old man had died of a heart attack while fixing fence, dropped dead at 71 with wire stretchers still in his hands. Jack had come back from Houston, where he'd been working as a technical writer for an oil services company, and stepped into boots he'd spent 25 years trying to escape. Then Linda got sick. Then the bills started. Then everything that could go wrong did. Inside, the house felt empty in that way houses do after funerals, full of people who don't know what to say. Neighbors had brought food, casseroles, and sheet cakes and fried chicken arranged on every flat surface in the kitchen. Luke moved among them, accepting condolences, thanking people for coming. Ben stood near the window, checking his watch. Jack walked through to his father's old office, closing the door behind him. The room smelled like pipe tobacco, even though the old man had been dead over a year. His desk sat against the far wall, covered in the paperwork of running a ranch. Ledgers, receipts, bills, the mortgage documents from 1968 when his father had borrowed $22,000 to buy a used combine and a newer tractor. Jack sat in the chair and opened the bottom drawer. Inside, arranged in careful chronological order, were letters. His father had been a prodigious letter writer, keeping carbon copies of everything he sent. Jack pulled out the most recent, dated November 1971. The handwriting was shaky but readable. Jack, if you're reading this, I'm gone and you've got the place now. You never wanted it. I know that. You wanted the world beyond the fence line, but it's yours now, and here's what you need to know. This land is worth more than cattle. It's worth more than the crops you can grow on it. This land is 12 miles north of Austin, and Austin is growing like a weed in wet soil. Don't ever sell for what it's worth today. Make them pay for what it will be worth tomorrow. Jack read it 3 times. His father had been many things, stubborn and hard, and sometimes cruel in the way of men who worked land that didn't want to be worked. But he hadn't been stupid. The old man had seen something, understood something about the way the world was changing. A knock on the door. Luke entered without waiting for permission, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He set one on the desk and took the other to the window. Everyone's leaving. Good. Ben wants to talk. About the ranch. Of course he does. Luke sipped his coffee, looking out at land he'd never left. You know what he's going to say. I know. And we'll listen. Then we'll decide. Luke turned from the window. Dad, I'm with you, whatever you decide. I just want you to know that. Jack felt something in his throat. Pushed it down. I know, son. They sat in silence while the last of the visitors departed, truck engines fading down the county road. When the house was finally quiet, Ben appeared in the doorway. We need to talk about the future of this place. Jack gestured to the chairs. Ben sat, crossing one leg over the other in that city way. Luke remained by the window, arms crossed. Ben pulled a folder from his briefcase. I've been looking at the numbers. The ranch grossed $15,000 last year. After expenses, feed, fuel, equipment repairs, you netted maybe $8,000. Dad, you can't live on $8,000 a year. We've managed. Mom's medical bills took everything you had saved. The funeral took most of what was left. You're carrying $22,000 in mortgage debt from Grandpa. At current cattle prices, you're looking at 7, maybe 8 more years of barely breaking even before you can pay that off. And that's if nothing breaks. If you don't have a bad year, if the market doesn't drop. Jack listened. The boy was right about the numbers. He'd always been good with numbers. Ben leaned forward. There's an opportunity here. Austin is growing. Land values are increasing. This property is worth maybe $100,000 on the open market. We could sell, pay off the mortgage, split what's left 3 ways. You could retire, buy a house in town. Luke could go back to school. I could invest my share in Houston real estate. And what happens to the ranch? Someone else's problem. Jack stood and walked to the window. Below, the land spread out in the late afternoon light, fence lines dividing pasture from pasture. Cattle moving slow across brown grass. The machine shed where his father had died. Your grandfather built this place from nothing. Bought it in 1898 for $3,000. Worked it through drought and depression and 2 world wars. Your grandmother buried 3 children in that cemetery where we put your mother today. This land has Monroe blood in it. Ben's voice took on an edge. And that's supposed to mean what exactly? That we're obligated to go broke slowly out of some sense of tradition? Dad, this is business. Emotion doesn't pay bills. Luke spoke from the window. Maybe some things are worth more than profit. Ben turned on his brother. Easy for you to say. You dropped out of college. You don't have a career. You don't have a future outside this place. Of course you want to keep it. I dropped out because Dad needed help when Grandpa died. You dropped out because you couldn't cut it. Boys, both sons went silent. Jack remained at the window thinking about his father's letter. This land is worth more than cattle. Make them pay for what it will be worth tomorrow. I'm not making any decisions today. Give me time. Ben stood. How much time? As much as I need. Dad, I have to get back to Houston. I've got projects, commitments. I can't just put my life on hold while you figure out if you want to accept reality. Then don't. Go back to Houston. I'll let you know what I decide. Ben grabbed his briefcase. This is a mistake. You're being stubborn for no reason. That land is worth $100,000 today. Tomorrow it might be worth 90. You're gambling with our inheritance. It's not your inheritance until I'm dead. Last I checked, I'm still here. Ben left without another word. They heard him drive away, gravel crunching under expensive tires. Luke remained by the window. He's scared. Jack turned. Of what? Of being poor again. Of ending up like you. The words hung in the air between them, true and cutting. Jack had spent 25 years in Houston, working office jobs, building a life that looked nothing like his father's. Then he'd come back, stepped into the same boots, the same debts, the same endless cycle of work that barely kept you alive. Maybe he's right to be scared. Are you? Scared? Jack thought about it every day, but fear never stopped a thing that needed doing. That night, after Luke had gone to bed in his old room upstairs, Jack sat at the kitchen table with maps. County maps, city planning maps, highway maps. He'd been collecting them for months, ever since his father died, and he'd started trying to understand what the old man had seen. This wasn't a new skill. Jack had spent 3 years in Vietnam as an intelligence officer, 1968 to 1970, assigned to the 1st Cavalry Division, operating out of Phuoc Van. His job had been pattern recognition, reading topographic maps, studying aerial photographs, predicting where the enemy would move based on terrain, rivers, roads, villages. The military had taught him that infrastructure was destiny. Control the roads, control the movement, control the rivers, control the supply lines, control the high ground, control the battlefield. It was a simple equation that scaled from jungle warfare to civilian life. Austin had 300,000 people in 1970. The city limits extended maybe 10 miles from the courthouse downtown. But the map showed something else, showed roads being planned, infrastructure being built, the beginnings of something larger. Interstate 35 ran through the heart of Austin, connecting San Antonio to the south with Dallas to the north. But the northern extension, the part that would run from Austin up through Georgetown and beyond, that was still being built. Jack had found references to it in county planning documents, newspaper articles about highway department budgets, bond elections for road construction. He'd spent hours in the county clerk's office reading through planning commission minutes, had driven to Austin to the state highway department, asking for public documents about the I-35 corridor, had subscribed to the Austin American Statesman and clipped every article about development, growth, infrastructure bonds. His collection filled 3 filing boxes now: newspaper clippings, planning documents, maps with his own annotations in red pencil, population projections, traffic studies, water and sewer expansion plans. Anyone else would have seen an obsession. Jack saw intelligence gathering, and his land sat 12 miles north of the current city limits, right in the path of that expansion. He pulled out a legal pad and started calculating. If Austin grew at 8% per year, which was conservative given the oil boom and the university, the city would double in size in 9 years. By 1982, if development followed the typical pattern, spreading outward at 2 to 3 miles per year, it would reach his property in 4 to 6 years. By 1978 or 79, his land would be in the suburban development corridor. And land in the suburban development corridor sold for 3, 4, sometimes 5 times what agricultural land sold for. He wrote out scenarios. Conservative estimate, his land would be worth $250,000 by 1980. Moderate estimate, $350,000. Optimistic, $500,000. But that was 7 years away. 7 years of barely breaking even. 7 years of one bad season away from foreclosure. 7 years of living on hope in the belief that he could read patterns and maps better than the bankers who wanted him to sell. The knock on the door came at 9:30, late enough that Jack knew it wasn't social. He opened it to find Ray Kellerman standing on the porch. Kellerman was 52, a Dallas developer who'd been buying land around Austin for 5 years. Jack knew him from the county planning meetings, where Kellerman sat in the back row taking notes while farmers argued about zoning changes. He wore a suit that probably cost $500 and drove a Lincoln Continental that sat in the driveway like a statement of intent. "Mr. Monroe, I'm sorry about your wife." "Thank you. I know this is a difficult time, but I wanted to speak with you about an opportunity." Jack didn't move from the doorway. "Now's not a good time, Ray." "I understand, but I think you'll want to hear this." Something in the man's voice made Jack step back, allowing him inside. They sat at the kitchen table, maps still spread across the surface. Kellerman noticed them, smiled slightly. "You've been doing your homework. A man should know what he owns." Kellerman set a briefcase on the table, opened it with practiced precision, pulled out a folder. Inside were architectural drawings, site plans, documents with the kind of detail that spoke to months of preparation. Jack recognized the work of expensive consultants, engineering studies, market analyses, traffic flow projections. "I'm prepared to offer you $100,000 for this property. Cash, 60-day close. I'll cover all closing costs and give you 90 days to vacate if you need it." Jack looked at the site plan. His 420 acres divided into half-acre lots, curving streets, cul-de-sacs arranged in that suburban pattern that was spreading across America like kudzu. The development was called Kellerman Heights. There were sketches of ranch-style houses with attached garages, young trees, neat lawns, price points written in the margins. 35 to 45,000 per home, 80 homes total. Gross revenue potential of 3.2 million. Kellerman was going to turn a $100,000 investment into $3 million in profit. The man knew exactly what he was buying. "That's more than twice what this land is worth." Kellerman smiled. "It is more than twice what this land is worth for cattle, Jack. But we both know you're not running a cattle operation here. You're sitting on 420 acres 12 miles from Austin with Interstate 35 coming through in the next 3 years. In 5 years, maybe 7, this land will be in the suburban corridor, which means it's worth what someone will pay who can see that far ahead. I know what it's worth. I also know what it's going to be worth. I'm offering you a fair price for both." Jack studied the drawings. Kellerman had done more than homework. He'd done the same analysis Jack had, probably with better resources. Professional market studies. Inside information from the highway department. The kind of intelligence that money could buy. The man leaned back in his chair, comfortable in his expensive suit. "Let me be straight with you, Jack. I've been buying land around Austin for 5 years. I've put together 2,000 acres north of the city. Your 420 is right in the middle. I can develop around you, but it's easier if I have this piece. So I'm willing to pay premium. But here's the thing. You're in no position to wait. Your wife's medical bills cleaned you out. Your mortgage payment is $1,200 a year, and you're barely netting $8,000 from the ranch. You've got debt, you've got pressure, and you've got a son in Houston who's going to want his inheritance. Take my offer. It's more than fair." Jack felt the room grow smaller. Kellerman knew too much. Had researched not just the land, but Jack's finances. Had probably talked to the banker, to neighbors, to people in town. This wasn't a casual offer. This was a calculated assault on a position Kellerman had already determined was weak. Jack studied the drawings. The man had done his homework, had seen the same patterns in the maps. But Kellerman had money to wait, had resources to develop, had the kind of capital that made land speculation not a gamble, but a calculated investment. "Why make this offer now? Why not wait until I'm desperate?" Kellerman closed the folder. "Because I respect you, Jack. I know your father. Knew him, I should say. He was a hard man, but an honest one. And because I think you're smart enough to see that this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. You could take this money, pay off your debts, set your sons up for success. Or you can hold on out of pride and watch the bank take it when you can't make the mortgage. And if I say no, then I'll buy the land next to yours and the land next to that. And in 5 years, when you're ready to sell, I'll already own everything around you, and I won't need your 420 acres as badly." Jack stood, walked to the window. The moon was up, 3/4 full, bright enough to cast shadows. He could see the fence lines, the cattle's shapes in the pasture, the outline of the barn against the sky. "I need to think about it." Kellerman stood. "Of course, I'll give you 60 days. Offer expires June 15th. After that, the number changes." "Changes how?" "Goes down. The longer you wait, the more risk I take that you'll see what I see and decide to hold. I'm paying a premium for certainty. The longer you make me wait, the less certain I am. After Kellerman left, Jack sat at the table until after midnight, looking at the site plan. $100,000. More money than his father had made in a lifetime of work. More money than Jack had seen in 48 years. But not enough. He couldn't explain why he felt that with such certainty, couldn't point to a specific piece of data that proved it. But he'd spent 3 years in Vietnam as an intelligence officer, reading maps, looking for patterns, trying to understand what the enemy would do next based on roads and rivers and terrain. He'd learned that the side that controlled infrastructure controlled territory. And Interstate 35 was infrastructure. The highway would come, the development would follow, and land that sold for $200 an acre today would sell for $1,000 tomorrow. Or he was wrong, and he'd lose everything. The next morning, Jack drove into town to see Red Patterson. Earl Patterson, called Red since childhood for hair long since gone gray, was 71 years old and had been Travis County's chief assessor for 42 years before retiring in 1970. If anyone understood land values in this part of Texas, it was Red. He lived in a small house on the edge of Liberty Hill, surrounded by the kind of organized chaos that marks a man who spent his life with paperwork. Filing cabinets lined the walls, maps covered every surface. Bookshelves sagged under the weight of county records dating back to statehood. Red answered the door in slippers and a cardigan, looking like someone's grandfather, which he was. But his eyes were sharp behind thick glasses. Jack Monroe. Come in, come in. I was sorry to hear about Linda. They sat in Red's office, a converted bedroom that smelled like pipe tobacco and old paper. Red poured coffee from a percolator that looked older than both of them. What can I do for you, Jack? Jack pulled out the site plan Kellerman had left. Red studied it, nodding slowly. Ray Kellerman. Smart man, ruthless, but smart. What's he offering? $100,000. Red whistled low. That's more than fair for agricultural land. Hell, that's generous. That's what he said. But you're here, which means you're not sure you should take it. Jack pulled out his maps, the calculations he'd done, the projections for Austin's growth. Red listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding, once or twice making notes on a legal pad. When Jack finished, Red sat back in his chair. You've done good work here. Your analysis is sound. Austin is growing. The interstate is coming. Land values will increase. But 7 years is a long time. A lot can go wrong in 7 years. Recession, oil bust, highway route changes. Any one of those things could make your land worth less than Kellerman's offering today. I know. So why are you considering holding? Jack thought about his father's letter, about Linda's grave on the hill, about Luke standing at the window saying maybe some things are worth more than profit. Because if I'm right, this land will be worth 5 times what Kellerman's offering. And if I'm wrong, I'll be broke. But at least I'll know I took a swing. Red smiled. Your daddy would be proud of you. Stubborn old bastard that he was. You think I'm making a mistake? Red stood, walked to a filing cabinet, pulled out a folder. Inside were maps, surveys, documents that looked official. This is the preliminary Interstate 35 corridor study. Came across my desk in 1972, right before I retired. It's not public yet, won't be for another 6 months. But it shows the proposed route. He spread the map on the desk. A red line ran north from Austin, and it passed less than 2 miles from Jack's eastern property line. Your land is right in the path. Kellerman knows it. That's why he's offering premium. He's trying to lock you in before the announcement makes it obvious to everyone. Jack studied the map. How sure is this route? 90%. The highway department has already purchased some of the right-of-way. The money's allocated in the state budget. It's happening. So I'm right. You're right about the interstate. But that doesn't mean you're right about being able to hold on long enough to see the payoff. Jack, you're running on fumes. 1 bad year and the bank forecloses. Then it doesn't matter what the land will be worth in 7 years. What would you do? Red pulled off his glasses, cleaned them on his cardigan. When I was your age, I bought a piece of land in Austin for $800. Everyone said I was crazy, that it was too far from downtown, that I'd never see a return. I held it for 30 years. Sold it in 1968 for $42,000. So you're saying hold? I'm saying I'm 71 years old and I held. But I also had a county pension coming in every month. I had security. You don't have that. You've got 2 sons, one of whom wants his inheritance now. You've got a mortgage you can barely service. You've got medical debts. Jack, Courage is admirable, but it doesn't pay bills. They sat in silence. Outside, a dog barked. A car passed on the street. Normal sounds of a normal day for everyone who wasn't deciding whether to bet their entire future on a map. Let me ask you something else, Jack said. If I decide to hold, what do I need to know? What do I need to watch for? Red pulled out a fresh legal pad, started writing. You need to watch three things. One, the formal announcement of the I-35 route. That'll come in the next year. Two, the city's master plan updates. Austin releases them every 3 years. The next one's due in '74. It'll show where they plan to extend water and sewer service. 3, bond elections. Anytime the city or county wants to build infrastructure, roads, water, sewer, they have to pass bonds. Watch what gets proposed and where. Jack copied down the notes. Anything else? Red looked at him hard. Yeah, don't tell anyone what you're planning. Not your boys, not your neighbors, not the banker. The moment people know you're speculating on development, they'll either try to buy you out cheap or they'll think you're crazy. Either way, you lose. I can do that. And Jack, one more thing. If you do this, if you really commit to holding, you need to understand what you're signing up for. 7 years of everyone in 3 counties thinking you're a fool. 7 years of watching your neighbors sell and get rich while you scrape by. 7 years of doubt every single morning when you wake up and wonder if today's the day it all falls apart. Jack stood. I've survived worse. Have you? Because I knew your daddy, and I knew this land broke him a little more every year. It's patient, land is. It'll wait you out. The question is whether you can wait it out right back. Jack drove home thinking about Red's words. The land will wait you out. He'd spent 25 years in Houston trying to escape exactly that, the patient grinding poverty of agriculture. And here he was, 48 years old, walking right back into it with his eyes open. Luke was working on a tractor when Jack got home, lying on his back under the engine with wrenches scattered around him. The 4010 John Deere, bought used in '65, perpetually on the edge of mechanical failure. How's she looking? Hydraulic leak. I can patch it, but we really need a new cylinder. How much? 200, maybe 250. Jack had $140 in the bank. We'll patch it. Luke slid out from under the tractor, wiped his hands on a rag. What did Red say? That I'm either very smart or very stupid, and we won't know which for 7 years. And Kellerman's offer? Still on the table for 60 days. Luke stood, looking at his father across the engine of a tractor that was held together by baling wire and stubbornness. What are you going to do? Jack looked out across the land. 420 acres that rolled away toward a horizon he couldn't see. Somewhere out there, the future was coming. Roads being built, cities spreading, the slow, inevitable advance of concrete over soil. I'm going to hold. Luke nodded once like this was exactly what he'd expected. Then I'm with you. It's going to be hard. I know. We might lose everything. I know that too. Jack felt something in his chest, a kind of pride mixed with fear. His youngest son, 21 years old, betting his future on his father's ability to read maps and wait. It was the kind of faith that could break your heart or make it stronger. That night, Jack wrote out a budget. $8,000 net income from the ranch if everything went perfect. No major equipment failures, no cattle deaths, no market collapse. Out of that, he needed to pay the mortgage, $1,200 a year. Property taxes, $800. Insurance, $200. That left $5,800 for everything else. Food, utilities, fuel. The 1,000 small expenses that made a ranch run. $5,800 to live on for a year. $111 a week. $15 a day. It was doable. Barely, if nothing went wrong. But things always went wrong. Jack pulled out Kellerman's site plan one more time, studied the neat rows of houses, the clean streets, the planned community that would erase every trace of the Monroe ranch. $100,000. He could take it, pay off the mortgage, give Ben his $33,000, give Luke his $33,000, keep $33,000 for himself and retire to a little house in town. Safe, secure, settled. He thought about his father, dead in a field with wire stretchers in his hands. Thought about Red, holding land for 30 years on a bet. Thought about the letter in the desk drawer. This land is worth more than cattle, but there was more than that. There was the principle of the thing. Jack had spent 3 years in Vietnam watching Americans die for reasons that kept changing depending on who was explaining them. He'd come home to a country that didn't want to hear about it, didn't want to know what he'd seen. He'd buried that war deep and come back to Texas to find his father dying and his wife dying, and everything he'd tried to build in Houston slipping away. The land was all he had left that made sense. 420 acres that didn't change based on politics or market sentiment or who was in the White House. It was ground. It was real. It was something you could stand on and measure and understand. And if he sold it now for a number that felt large but was actually small, he'd spend the rest of his life wondering what it would have been worth if he'd just held on, wondering if he'd given away his children's future out of fear. Better to fail trying than succeed at giving up. Jack took the site plan, walked to the wood stove in the corner of the kitchen, opened the door. The coals from a dinner still glowed red, pulsing like a heartbeat. He fed the papers in one at a time, watching Kellerman's careful drawings curl and blacken and turn to ash. 80 homes at $40,000 each, $3 million in gross revenue, all of it going up in smoke because Jack Monroe from Liberty Hill, Texas had decided that patience was worth more than certainty. When it was done, he sat back down at the table and wrote a letter on a sheet of plain white paper. Dear Mr. Kellerman, thank you for your generous offer of $100,000 for my property. After careful consideration, I have decided not to sell at this time. I wish you well in your future endeavors. Sincerely, Jack Monroe. He sealed it in an envelope, addressed it to Kellerman's Dallas office, put a stamp in the corner. In the morning, he'd mail it from the post office in town, and then there'd be no going back. The offer would expire in 60 days. Kellerman would move on to other properties, and Jack would be left with his maps and his calculations and the growing certainty that he'd either made the smartest decision of his life or the dumbest. There was no way to know which. Not yet, not for years. Luke came down the stairs in his pajamas, saw his father at the table. Can't sleep? Too much thinking. Luke poured himself a glass of water, sat across from Jack. I've been thinking too, about what happens next. What do you mean? I mean, Ben's going to be angry. He's going to say you're being stubborn. Maybe he'll try to force a sale. He can try. Doesn't mean he'll succeed. Dad, I need to tell you something about Ben. Jack looked up. Luke's face was serious in the dim light from the kitchen lamp. Last year, before Grandpa died, Ben came to me, asked me to help him get a loan. Said he needed $15,000 for an investment opportunity. I told him to ask you, but he said you'd say no. So he went to a bank in Houston, used his future inheritance as collateral, told them when Grandpa died, he'd inherit a third of this place. Jack felt something cold in his stomach, and he invested it in oil futures. Thought the OPEC situation would go one way, it went another. He lost everything. Now he owes the bank $18,000. It's due in January. That's why he wants to sell. That's why he needs to sell. Dad, if we don't sell, if he can't pay that debt, they're going to come after his salary. Maybe worse. He's desperate. Jack sat back, processing this. His oldest son, the petroleum engineer with the shiny shoes in the Houston office, was broke and in debt and had gambled with land he didn't own. Does he know you told me? No. Keep it that way. For now. After Luke went back to bed, Jack sat alone in the kitchen, thinking about the patterns that connected fathers and sons. His father had worked himself to death on this land. Jack had tried to escape it, failed, come back. Ben had escaped, made something of himself, then gambled it away. Luke had never tried to leave it all. 3 generations, 3 different strategies for survival, and only one piece of land. The sun came up over Travis County the way it had for a million mornings before, indifferent to the decisions of men. Jack stood on the porch with coffee, watching the light spread across his property. Cattle moving toward the feed trough, windmill turning slow circles, the machine shed where his father had died, door hanging open on one hinge. In 60 days, Kellerman's offer would expire. In 60 days, Jack would have burned the last bridge back to safety. He thought about what Red had said. 7 years of everyone thinking you were a fool, 7 years of doubt every morning. But there was another voice too, his father's voice from the letter. Make them pay for what it will be worth tomorrow. Jack finished his coffee and walked down to the barn. Work didn't care about big decisions. The cattle needed feeding. The tractor needed fixing. The fence along the South 40 had 3 posts rotted through and needed replacing. He pulled on gloves, grabbed post hole diggers, headed out into a wind that smelled like dust and distance. Behind him, the house stood white against the morning sky, the same house his grandfather had built in 1898 when land was cheap and the future was whatever you were strong enough to make it. Somewhere south in an office in Dallas, Ray Kellerman was probably planning his next move. Somewhere in Houston, Ben was calculating how long until his debts came due. Somewhere in Austin, city planners were drawing lines on maps that would change the shape of the world. But here, on 420 acres 12 miles north of the capital, Jack Monroe sank a post-hole digger into hard ground and started the work of holding on. One post at a time, one day at a time, one stubborn decision after another. He'd refused $100,000. Everyone would say he was a fool, and maybe he was, but he'd find out together with the land, patient and waiting, to see who could outlast who. The letter went out on a Tuesday morning in April. Jack drove into Liberty Hill, walked into the post office with the envelope in his hand, and gave it to Mabel Henderson behind the counter. She was 63, had worked there since the Eisenhower administration, and knew everyone's business before they did. Letter to Dallas, she said, studying the address through reading glasses that hung on a chain around her neck. Ray Kellerman. That's right. Heard he made you an offer on your place. Word travels fast. Mabel set the envelope on the scale, watched the needle settle. It's a small town, Jack. People talk, especially when someone turns down that kind of money. How much was it, if you don't mind me asking? Jack met her eyes. Enough. She stamped the envelope with more force than necessary, dropped it in the outgoing mail bin. Jack watched it disappear, felt something final in the gesture, like watching a door close that wouldn't open again. Mabel leaned across the counter, lowered her voice, even though they were alone in the post office. My cousin works at the county clerk's office. She says Kellerman's been buying up everything north of here, paying premium prices. And you turned him down. I did. You mind telling me why? Because what he offered wasn't what it's worth. It was twice what your land's worth, Jack. Everyone knows that. Twice what it's worth today, not what it'll be worth tomorrow. Mabel pulled off her glasses, let them drop against her chest. You sound like your father, stubborn old goat that he was. He held on to land through the Depression when everyone else was selling. Lost almost everything. You remember that? I remember. And here you are, doing the same thing, holding when you should be selling. Makes a person wonder if stubbornness runs in families like blue eyes or high blood pressure. Maybe it does. You sure you know what you're doing? Jack picked up the receipt she'd pushed across the counter. No, Mabel, but I'm doing it anyway. He drove back to the ranch, past the Dairy Queen where farmers gathered for coffee and gossip, past the feed store where his credit was already stretched thin, past the First National Bank where his mortgage sat like a time bomb. By noon, everyone in 3 counties would know. Jack Monroe had refused $100,000. Jack Monroe had lost his mind. The spring of 1973 was harder than Jack expected. Not the work. He'd grown up with work. Understood that ranching was 90% endurance and 10% hoping things didn't break. But the silence was new. Neighbors who used to wave from their trucks now drove past without looking. Men who'd stood beside him at Linda's funeral now found reasons to be elsewhere when he walked into the feed store. Bob Wilson stopped him outside the post office one morning in May. Bob ranched 380 acres adjacent to Jack's western property line, had known Jack since they were both in elementary school. Jack, can I speak plainly? Always. People are worried about you. Ever since Linda died, you've been making strange decisions. Turning down Kellerman's offer. That's not like you. We think maybe the grief is clouding your judgment. Jack looked at his old friend, saw genuine concern mixed with something else. Fear, maybe. Fear that if Jack could lose his mind, anyone could. I appreciate the concern, Bob, but my judgment's fine. Is it? Because from where I'm standing, you're holding on to a piece of land that's draining you dry. You could sell, set yourself up, maybe enjoy what's left of your life. I am enjoying my life. Are you? Because you look about 10 years older than you did 6 months ago. Bob walked away shaking his head. Jack stood in the parking lot, caught his reflection in the truck's side mirror. Bob was right. Somewhere between Linda's diagnosis and her funeral and the decision to hold the land, Jack had aged. New lines around his eyes, gray in his hair that hadn't been there before, the look of a man carrying weight that never got lighter. Luke kept the ranch running while Jack tried to keep the finances from collapsing. They worked opposite schedules, Luke handling the dawn feeding and fence repair, while Jack drove to Austin 3 days a week for substitute teaching. The school district paid $5 an hour. Jack taught history to sophomores who didn't care, stood in front of classrooms explaining the Civil War and Reconstruction, while his own reconstruction happened in slow motion back on the ranch. The teaching was harder than the ranch work in ways Jack hadn't anticipated. At least on the ranch, effort produced results. Fix a fence and it stayed fixed. Feed cattle and they ate. But in the classroom, he could pour everything he had into a lesson about Gettysburg or the Treaty of Versailles and watch it evaporate the moment the bell rang. The kids didn't care about history. They cared about football games and who was dating who and whether they could get permission to leave campus for lunch. One morning in May, Jack stood at the blackboard writing dates from the Texas Revolution, while a kid in the back row threw wadded paper at another kid's head. Jack stopped writing, turned around. "You want to share what's so interesting back there?" The kid, a linebacker named Travis something, slouched lower in his desk. "No, sir." "No? Because it seems like Sam Houston's retreat to San Jacinto isn't capturing your attention. History's boring. Is it? Or are you just too lazy to find what makes it interesting?" The room went quiet. Other kids looked at Travis, then at Jack, waiting to see what would happen. Jack set the chalk down, walked to the back of the classroom. "You think you've got problems. You think your life is hard. But 140 years ago, men your age were fighting for their lives at the Alamo, dying at Goliad. They didn't have time to be bored. They were too busy trying to create something that mattered." Travis met his eyes. "What's that got to do with me?" "Everything. Because you're living in what they built. This school, this town, this whole state. It's all because men decided something was worth fighting for, even when everyone said they were crazy. Even when they knew they might lose." Jack walked back to the front of the classroom. "The lesson's not about memorizing dates. It's about understanding what it takes to hold on to something when the world's telling you to let go." The bell rang. Kids grabbed their books and shuffled toward the door. Travis stopped at Jack's desk on his way out. "You're that rancher, aren't you? The one who turned down all that money." "I am." "Why'd you do it?" "Same reason Houston retreated to San Jacinto. Sometimes you gotta lose ground to win the war." The kid nodded like he understood something, then left. Jack gathered his notes, erased the blackboard, and drove back to the ranch thinking about the ways teaching and ranching weren't that different. Both required patience. Both required believing in delayed rewards. Both required faith that the work mattered even when there was no immediate evidence it did. The tractor broke in June. Hydraulic line finally gave out, spraying fluid across the barn floor while Luke tried to pull a stuck post. They spent 2 days trying to patch it before admitting they needed a new cylinder. $240 at the implement deal, and Jack didn't have it. He drove to the bank, asked about a short-term loan. The loan officer buyer was Tom Pritchard, 35 years old, son of the bank president. He looked at Jack's file like he was reading a medical diagnosis. "Mr. Monroe, your debt-to-income ratio is concerning. You're already carrying the primary mortgage plus the medical debt. Adding more borrowing when your ranch is barely breaking even, I don't see how we can justify that. It's a hydraulic cylinder. $240, I'll pay it back in 3 months. And if you have another bad month, another unexpected expense, we're not in the business of enabling financial decisions that don't make sense. Tom, I've banked here for 20 years, which is why I'm being honest with you. The bank's position is that you should seriously consider selling. Kellerman's offer was generous. If something similar came along, you'd be wise to take it." Jack left without the loan. He sold 30 head of cattle to a buyer in Georgetown, took less than market rate because he needed cash immediately. The sale netted him $800 after the buyer took his commission. He bought the hydraulic cylinder, paid the feed bill that was 60 days overdue, and had $93 left. $93 in June. First mortgage payment due in September. Luke found him in the barn that night, sitting on a hay bale with a calculator and a ledger. Numbers that didn't add up no matter how many times you ran them. "How bad is it?" "Bad. Can we make September? If nothing else breaks, if the cattle market holds, if we don't get hail." That's a lot of ifs. Jack looked at his son. 21 years old, should have been finishing college, chasing girls, building a future that didn't involve trying to save a dying ranch. Instead, he was here, betting his youth on his father's stubbornness. "You should leave. Go back to school. Get out while you can." Luke sat on the bale next to him. "You know what I learned when I dropped out? I learned that some things matter more than a degree. You taught me that. You and Grandpa both. This land matters. What it represents matters. I'm not leaving. Even if we lose it, especially if we lose it, then at least we'll lose it together." The summer was drought, not the catastrophic kind that made the news, but the grinding kind that wore you down week by week. Pastures turned brown by July. Creek levels dropped until the cattle had to walk through mud to reach water. Hay prices climbed because everyone needed to feed since the grass wasn't growing. Jack's teaching stopped in June when the school let out. No income except whatever the ranch generated, and the ranch was generating nothing. They sold more cattle, down to 90 head from the original 150. Each sale felt like cutting off a piece of himself. Ben called in August. Jack hadn't heard from him since the funeral. "Dad, I've been thinking about your situation." "Have you?" "I have, and I want to help. I can loan you some money to get through the year." Jack felt something tighten in his chest. "Where would you get that kind of money?" "I've been saving, working overtime. But Dad, I need to be honest with you. I didn't just save this money. I borrowed it from a bank in Houston, told them I'd pay it back when you eventually sell the ranch and I get my inheritance." Jack felt cold settle in his stomach. "How much?" "15,000. I used 5 for something else. Something I regret. But I have 10,000 I can give you. It's due back in 18 months. January 75. If you haven't sold by then, I'll have to figure something else out." "Ben, you borrowed against land you don't own yet." "I know. I was desperate, made bad decisions. But the money's there if you need it. Consider it an advance on my inheritance." "What did you use the other 5,000 for?" Silence on the line. Then Ben's voice, smaller. "Oil futures. Thought I saw a play with the OPEC situation. I was wrong. Lost it all. Dad, I'm so sorry. I've been gambling, making stupid decisions. I'm trying to fix it." Jack wanted to be angry. Should have been angry. But mostly he felt tired. His oldest son was broke and making desperate choices, just like Jack was. Different forms of desperation, same root cause. 3,000. "I'll take 3,000. Pay me back when you can. And Ben, no more gambling." "I promise, Dad. I'm getting help. There's a counselor through work. I'm trying to be better." The money arrived by wire transfer the next week. Jack used 2,000 to make the September mortgage payment early, put 1,000 in reserve for emergencies. It bought him time. 6 months, maybe 8. Not enough to wait out the Interstate announcement, but enough to survive another season. It bought him time, but it also meant Ben was now carrying 18,000 in debt, secured by nothing but hope that Jack's gamble would pay off. If Jack failed, Ben would be destroyed too. Red Patterson showed up unannounced on a Saturday morning in September. Drove his old Plymouth Fury up the drive, honking twice before getting out. Jack met him on the porch. "Thought you might want to see this." Red pulled a newspaper from under his arm. Austin American-Statesman, dated September 14th, 1973. Front page of the business section. Texas Highway Department confirms Interstate 35 Northern Extension, construction to begin spring 1974. There was a map showing the proposed route, a bold line running north from Austin through Georgetown and beyond. And there, marked in red on the county designation map, was Jack's property, less than 2 miles from the proposed corridor. Jack read the article twice. The highway would be completed in phases. First section Georgetown to Round Rock by 1975. Second section, Round Rock to Austin city limits by 1976. Full completion including interchanges and access roads by 1978. 5 years. The land would be in the suburban development corridor in 5 years. Red sat on the porch steps, pulled out a pipe, tamped tobacco with practiced motions. "You were right. The pattern held. Doesn't feel like being right yet. Give it time. Right now you're in the valley. Can't see the mountain from down here. But it's coming." Jack folded the paper, tucked it under his arm. "I'm going to frame this. Put it on the wall. For the days when I need to remember why I'm doing this. You'll need it. Because those days are coming more than you think." Red was right. The announcement changed nothing about Jack's immediate situation. He still had 90 head of cattle that needed feeding. Still had a mortgage payment due every September and March. Still had equipment held together with baling wire and prayers. But something shifted in town. Not friendliness exactly. More like curiosity. People who'd been avoiding him started asking questions. "How did you know? Did Kellerman know? Are you going to sell now?" Jack kept his answers short. Didn't know, probably, not yet. The truth was more complicated. He'd known the way you know anything when you study it long enough. The same way he'd known in Vietnam where the enemy would move based on terrain and trails. Pattern recognition, infrastructure analysis, the discipline to do homework while everyone else made guesses. Bob Wilson sold his 380 acres in October. Developer from Dallas, not Kellerman, offered him $220,000. Bob took it, held a party at his house the night after closing, invited half the county. Jack didn't go but heard about it from people who did. Bob had given a speech, they said, stood on his porch with a beer in hand and talked about liberation, about how he'd spent 40 years breaking his back on land that barely paid him back, about how his kids had moved away because there was no future in ranching, about how he was 61 years old and finally free. The crowd had cheered. Someone had started singing for "He's a Jolly Good Fellow." Bob's wife, Betty, had cried happy tears. 3 weeks later, Jack saw Bob in the hardware store in Georgetown. Bob was buying paint samples, talking about renovating the house in San Antonio they'd bought with the proceeds. A nice place in Alamo Heights, good schools even though their kids were grown, close to shopping and restaurants. "Jack, good to see you." "Bob, heard about your sale. Congratulations." "Thanks. Best decision I ever made. Betty and I are moving next month. Can't wait to get out of Liberty Hill. No offense." "None taken." Bob set down the paint samples, looked at Jack with something like pity. "You should think about selling too. Before the market turns, land values won't keep going up forever." "Maybe not." "Definitely not. I talked to an economist at UT. He says this is a bubble. Says by 77, 78, prices will crash. You wait too long, you'll end up with land nobody wants." "Or maybe the economist's wrong." Bob laughed, not unkindly. "Jack, you're a smart guy, smarter than me in a lot of ways. But you're also the most stubborn son of a bitch I've ever met. Pride's going to be your downfall, you'll see." They parted ways. Jack bought fence staples and wire, drove back to the ranch thinking about Bob's words. Pride. Everyone kept calling it pride, as if the only reason to hold on to something was ego. But it wasn't pride, or not just pride, it was calculation. Jack had run the numbers 100 different ways, had studied development patterns from San Antonio, Houston, Dallas, had read every planning document the county published, had attended every city council meeting where infrastructure was discussed. The pattern was clear. Austin was growing at 8 to 10% per year. The interstate was coming. Water and sewer would follow. And when infrastructure reached land, the land's value multiplied. It wasn't speculation, it was math. But math didn't help when you were broke. Math didn't feed cattle or pay mortgages or put food on the table. Jack saw Bob one more time 4 months later. It was February of 75, bitter cold. Jack in Georgetown, buying feed. Bob was at the Dairy Queen sitting alone at a table by the window. He looked older somehow, smaller. Jack almost kept walking, but something made him stop, go inside, slide into the booth across from Bob. "Heard you moved to San Antonio." Bob looked up from his coffee. "Moved back last month." "The house didn't work out?" "The house was fine, beautiful place. But the money, Jack. I made some bad decisions." "What kind of decisions?" Bob's hands shook slightly as he lifted his coffee cup. "I took the 220 from the sale, paid off my mortgage. That was 45,000. Bought the San Antonio house. That was 80,000. Put the rest in a savings and loan. They were offering 9% interest. Seemed safe. But the S&L went under. Some kind of fraud. Regulators shut it down. FDIC insured 40,000. I lost 95,000. Just gone." "Jesus, Bob." "So now I'm back in Liberty Hill, renting a house, no land, no savings, working at the feed store for minimum wage because I'm too old to do anything else. I'm 62 years old and I've got nothing." Jack didn't know what to say. Bob had done what everyone said was the smart thing, had taken the money, had gotten out while the getting was good, and now he was broke anyway. The difference between them, Jack realized, wasn't intelligence or foresight. It was that Bob had tried to cash out and restart. While Jack was still in the game, still playing, still hoping that staying at the table would eventually pay off. But there was no guarantee. Jack could end up exactly where Bob was, broke at 62. Nothing to show for a lifetime of work. The only difference was Bob had already lost, and Jack still had a chance to win. They sat in silence. Finally, Bob spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "You were right to hold on. I see that now. I got scared, took the first exit I could find, and it led nowhere. You made the choice that made sense at the time. Did I? Or did I just take the easy way out? Sell high, walk away, let someone else deal with the complications. Turns out the complications followed me anyway." Jack stood, dropped $1 on the table for his own coffee he hadn't drunk. "Bob, I'm sorry about what happened. I really am." "Don't be sorry. Just don't make my mistake. Don't sell because you're tired. Sell when the price is right. And if you're right about that land, the price isn't right yet. Jack drove home thinking about parallel lives. Bob's and his own. Two men who'd started in the same place, made opposite decisions, and both ended up struggling. The difference was Bob's struggle was over. He'd lost, while Jack's struggle was ongoing, which meant he still had a chance. Unless he didn't. Unless all this pain and sacrifice and stubborn holding on led to the same place Bob had ended up. Broken, nothing but regrets. The sale set a new benchmark regardless. Land that had been worth $200 an acre was now selling for $579 an acre. Jack's 420 acres, by that math, would be worth $243,000. More than double Kellerman's offer from 6 months ago. Luke did the math at the kitchen table. Dad, if we sold now, you'd clear over $200,000 after the mortgage. That's enough to set up everyone. Buy a place in town. Actually retire. Jack looked at his son across the table. You want to sell? I'm asking if you want to sell. No, you're asking if I think we should sell. Different question. Okay, do you think we should sell? Jack stood, walked to the window. Outside, the land rolled away in shades of brown and gold, autumn colors under October sky. 5 years. Red had said 5 years until the development corridor reached them. 5 more years of barely surviving. 5 more years of everyone thinking he was crazy for not taking the sure money. But 5 years after that, if the pattern held, the land would be worth 4, 5, maybe 6 times what it was worth today. $1 million, maybe more. I think we're just getting started. They made it through winter on cattle sales and the last of Ben's money. Jack took substitute teaching jobs when the district called, stood in front of classrooms talking about the Alamo and the Texas Revolution to kids who looked at him like he was a relic from the same era. He was 50 now, felt 60, moved like 70. The ranch was aging him in dog years. Luke got married in March of 1974. Rebecca Sims, a girl from Liberty Hill who'd known Luke since high school. The wedding was small, 30 people in the Methodist church, reception in the fellowship hall with cake and punch. Jack paid for it with money he didn't have, put it on a credit card that he'd have to pay off somehow. Luke and Rebecca moved into the ranch house, took over the upstairs bedroom that had been Luke's as a kid. Rebecca got a job at the county clerk's office in Georgetown, 20-minute drive each way, brought home $280 every 2 weeks. That income, added to what the ranch generated, was enough to keep them from drowning. Barely. Spring 1974 brought rain. Not enough to end the drought, but enough to green up the pastures, give the remaining cattle something to eat besides expensive hay. Jack and Luke spent April fixing fence, replacing posts rotted through from years of weather. Hard work that left them both exhausted by sundown. One evening in May, Luke brought through the future. They were working on the south fence line, Jack digging post holes while Luke mixed concrete. Dad, Rebecca's pregnant. Jack stopped digging, looked at his son. Luke was grinning like he'd just won the lottery. When? December. Right around Christmas. Jack felt something complicated in his chest. Joy for his son, fear for the timing, another mouth to feed, another person depending on a ranch that couldn't support the people it already had. Congratulations, son, that's wonderful news. Thanks. And Dad, I want you to know, we're not going anywhere. Baby doesn't change that. We're in this together. They worked in silence after that, the only sounds the shovel biting earth and the scrape of the mixing trough. Jack thought about his own father, dead in a field at 71. Thought about himself, 50 years old and aging faster than the calendar suggested. Thought about Luke's child, not even born yet, already inheriting a gamble. 4 more years until the development corridor. 4 more years of holding on by fingernails and stubbornness. He could do 4 years, had to do 4 years. Didn't have a choice. The highway construction started in June. Jack drove out to watch them break ground on the Georgetown section. Big yellow earth movers tearing into caliche and limestone. The sound of progress echoing across the hill country. A state representative gave a speech about infrastructure and growth in the future of Texas. Nobody mentioned the farmers whose land had been taken through eminent domain to make the road possible. Jack stood at the fence line with a dozen other ranchers, watching the future arrive in diesel smoke and torn earth. One of them, an older man Jack didn't know, spoke without turning his head. They're going to pave this whole country eventually, turn it into one big suburb from Houston to Dallas. Maybe? You holding or selling? Holding. The man glanced at Jack. You're the one turned down Kellerman last year. That's me. Heard you were crazy. Now I'm not so sure. They watched in silence as the machines worked. By sunset, they'd moved 100 yards of earth, the beginning of a road that would change everything. The cattle market collapsed in July. National recession, inflation hitting double digits, gas crisis from the OPEC embargo. Beef prices dropped from 38 cents a pound to 29 cents. Jack's remaining 90 head were suddenly worth a third less than they'd been worth a year ago. He sold 50 head to make the September mortgage payment, kept 40 as breeding stock. The ranch was now operating below minimum sustainable herd size. Any more losses and there'd be no ranch at all, just land sitting empty while Jack waited for the future to arrive. Ben called in September. Jack hadn't heard from him since the loan. "Dad, I need to talk to you about something." "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. I just need to tell you the truth about that $18,000 I owe. The bank restructured it, extended the term to 5 years at a higher interest. I'm making minimum payments, slowly chipping away. But it's going to take until 1979 to pay it off completely. I wanted you to know that when you sell, whenever that is, I won't need my share right away. The payment plan is manageable as long as I keep my job." "That's good, son. Real good." "And Dad, I've been sober from gambling 6 months now. Going to meetings, it's working. I'm proud of you." Silence on the line. Then Ben's voice, thick with emotion. "That means more than you know." They talked for another 10 minutes, mostly small things. Ben's kids, Rebecca's pregnancy, the weather. Normal conversation between father and son. When they hung up, Jack sat at the kitchen table feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Not happiness exactly, but maybe hope. The sense that broken things could be repaired if you were patient enough. Rebecca had the baby in December, 2 weeks before Christmas. A girl. They named her Emily, after Jack's mother, who died when he was young. Luke brought her home to the ranch on Christmas Eve, this tiny person wrapped in blankets, dependent on adults who were themselves barely holding on. Jack held his granddaughter in the living room while Luke and Rebecca slept upstairs. She was warm and small and completely trusting. He thought about what the world might look like when she was his age. Thought about whether there would still be ranches or whether it would all be suburbs and shopping malls. Thought about whether holding on to this land made him wise or selfish. The baby started crying. Jack walked her around the room the way he'd walked Ben and Luke decades ago, back when Linda was alive and the future seemed knowable. Outside, the land spread away into darkness, 420 acres that might be worth $1 million or might be worth nothing, depending on whether Jack could hold on long enough to find out. He looked down at Emily's face. She'd stopped crying, was looking at him with that unfocused baby stare that seemed to see everything and nothing. "Your grandpa's making a bet on your future," he whispered. "Hope it pays off." The year turned. 1975 arrived cold and broke. Jack's savings were gone. Luke's savings were gone. The ranch account had $312. First mortgage payment due in March. Ben sent a check in January, $2,000 with a note. "Dad got a bonus at work. Use this to keep fighting. Your son, Ben." Jack deposited the check, used $1,500 for cattle feed, put $500 in reserve. Added to what the ranch might generate by March, he'd have maybe $4,000 total. The mortgage was $1,200, property tax was $950, that left $1,850 for everything else. It was going to be close. Red Patterson came by in February, brought barbecue from a place in Lockhart. They ate on the porch despite the cold, watching the sun set over the land that looked the same as it had for 1,000 years. "You know what I admire about you, Jack?" "What's that?" "You're too dumb to know when you're beat." Jack smiled. "That a compliment? Take it how you want. But I've watched men my whole life. Watched them make decisions about land. Most of them are either too eager to sell or too scared to hold. You're the first person I've met who's stubborn enough to do neither. You're not holding because you love the land. You're holding because you calculated the math and decided the math was worth the pain. Is that admirable or stupid? Depends on whether you're right. But that's the thing about big bets. You don't know until it's over." They sat in silence as darkness came. Red left around 8, drove his Plymouth down the county road with one taillight out. Jack watched him go, then walked the property in the cold, checking fence lines, looking for problems that would become disasters if ignored. The land was quiet under stars. No traffic noise, no city lights, just wind and the distant cry of coyotes. This was what he was fighting for, not the money, not even the principle, but this, space, silence, the dignity of work that produced something real. 4 more years, and the development corridor would reach him. 4 more years, and the gamble would pay off or destroy him. Jack Monroe, 50 years old, stood in a pasture in Travis County, Texas, and made the only promise he knew how to keep. I'm not selling. The land didn't answer. It never did. But Jack felt something settle in his chest anyway. Not peace exactly, more like resolution. The kind that came from knowing you'd committed to a course and there was no turning back. He walked back to the house where Luke and Rebecca and baby Emily were sleeping. Tomorrow he'd feed cattle, fix fence, make phone calls about bills he couldn't pay. The same thing he'd do the next day and the day after that. For 4 more years, or until it killed him, whichever came first. The spring of 1975 arrived with the kind of rain that looked like mercy but felt like judgment. 3 inches in April, another 2 in May. The pastures greened up for the first time in 18 months, grass pushing through soil that had been dust and rock. The cattle fattened. The creek ran full. Anyone driving past the Monroe ranch would have thought things were looking up. They would have been wrong. Jack sat at the kitchen table on a Tuesday morning in June, sorting bills into piles. Urgent, very urgent, catastrophic. The property tax notice sat in the catastrophic pile, $950 due by July 1st, or the county would start lien proceedings. He had $430 in the ranch account. Luke and Rebecca's combined income might add another $300 by deadline. That left $220 short, $220. The difference between keeping the land and losing it to tax sale. Less than what he'd spend on fuel in a month. Less than a single day's teaching pay if he worked full-time instead of substitute. But he didn't have it. Luke came in from the morning feeding, boots muddy from the wet pasture. Rebecca followed with Emily on her hip, the baby now 6 months old and starting to recognize faces. She smiled when she saw Jack, that toothless grin that made everything seem worthwhile. "Morning, Dad." "Morning." Luke poured coffee, sat across from Jack. Saw the bills. "We short again?" $220 for the property tax, due in 3 weeks. "Can we sell some cattle?" "Not enough head left to matter. We sell now, we're below sustainable herd size. Won't have anything to rebuild with when prices come back." Luke sipped his coffee, thinking. Rebecca could ask for overtime at the clerk's office. She's already working 45 hours a week. And we've got Emily. Can't push her harder. They sat in silence. Outside, the land looked prosperous in that way it does after rain. Green and full and deceptively abundant. But prosperity and abundance were two different things. You could have one without the other. The land was abundant. The bank account was empty. "I could take a second mortgage on the equipment," Jack said. "The combine, the tractor, the implements might get us through the summer. And if they foreclose on the equipment, how do we run the ranch?" "We don't. But at least we'd still have the land." Luke shook his head. "Dad, we're not mortgaging equipment. We're not cannibalizing the operation to buy time. That's losing slower, not winning." "Then what do you suggest?" Luke was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "I've been thinking about something. Something I haven't wanted to bring up because I know how you'll react." "Say it." "We could sell 40 acres. The northeast corner, up by the road. It's not good cattle land, too rocky, but with the interstate coming, road frontage is valuable. We could probably get 30, maybe 35,000. Use it to pay off all the immediate debts, give us breathing room for a year or two." Jack felt something tight in his chest. "You want to break up the property. I want to survive. There's a difference." "Is there? Because once you start selling pieces, where does it stop?" 40 acres this year, 60 next year, 80 the year after. Before you know it, you've sold the whole thing 20 acres at a time, and you've got nothing to show for it. Or we sell 40 now, hold the rest until the price is right, and come out ahead. "Dad, we're not trying to hold forever. We're trying to hold long enough. 40 acres might buy us that time." Jack stood, walked to the window. The northeast corner Luke was talking about rolled up from the creek bottom toward the county road. It was rocky, like Luke said, good for nothing but cedar trees and rattlesnakes. But it was part of the whole. Once you started dividing land, you changed its nature, made it less than the sum of its parts. But Luke was right about one thing. They needed breathing room, needed space between crisis and catastrophe. 40 acres might buy that space. "I'll think about it. That's all I'm asking." Jack thought about it for 3 days. Walked the northeast 40, studying terrain he'd known since childhood. His father had run sheep on this section back in the 50s, before the market collapsed and made wool worthless. Jack had helped build the fence line as a teenager, digging post holes in caliche that fought back with every shovel thrust. The land remembered. Jack could see the remnants of old fence posts, weathered gray and leaning, could see the limestone outcroppings where rattlesnakes sunned themselves on cool mornings, could see the game trails where deer moved between pasture and creek. It wasn't pretty land, wasn't productive land, but it was his land, part of the 420 acres that formed a complete unit, a functioning ranch, a place that made sense as a whole. On the third day of walking, Jack sat on a limestone outcropping at the highest point of the 40. From here, he could see most of his property spreading south and west. The white farmhouse where 3 generations had lived and died, the barn where his father had collapsed, the pastures where he'd worked cattle alongside his own father as a boy. He thought about what Luke had said. We're not trying to hold forever. We're trying to hold long enough. That was the key difference between stubbornness and strategy. Stubborn men held because letting go felt like losing. Strategic men held until holding no longer served the goal. And the goal wasn't to own 420 acres. The goal was to build wealth, to create security, to prove that patience and research beat panic and speculation. Selling 40 acres to save 380 wasn't losing. It was tactical retreat. The kind he'd learned in Vietnam, give up ground that doesn't matter to protect ground that does. But God, it hurt. Jack picked up a piece of limestone, felt its weight in his hand. His grandfather had probably touched this same rock 90 years ago when he first claimed this land. His father had walked this ground for 7 decades. Now Jack was the keeper of it, the temporary steward of something that would outlast them all. Except it wouldn't outlast anything if the county seized it for unpaid taxes. He threw the stone, watched it arc through air and land in brush 30 yards away. Heard it hit with a sound like finality. Then he stood and walked down the hill to make the call that would break up the property his family had held intact since 1883. Jack called a realtor in Georgetown, a woman named Patricia Mills, who specialized in land sales. She came out the following week, walked the property with Jack, took notes on a yellow legal pad. You're looking at prime development land in 3 to 5 years. Right now, it's worth maybe $600 an acre because of the road frontage and the interstate proximity. That's $24,000 for 40 acres. But if you can wait 2 years, it'll be worth double that. Can't wait 2 years, need to sell now. Patricia studied him over her reading glasses. You're in a tight spot. That's one way to put it. I can list it at $650 an acre, $26,000 total. Might get lucky, find a buyer who sees what I see. But more likely we settle around $600. Listed at $700. I'll take the first offer over $25. Patricia made a note. You're confident. I'm desperate. There's a difference. The listing went active on Monday. By Friday, Jack had 2 offers. One for $24,000 from a local investor. One for $27,500 from a partnership out of Dallas. Jack took the Dallas offer, signed the papers in Patricia's office, and walked out with a check for $26,200 after her commission. He deposited the check on a Tuesday morning, paid the property tax, paid the overdue feed bill, paid the equipment note, paid the mortgage early, put $5,000 in savings, gave Luke $2,000 for household expenses, kept $3,000 for emergencies. For the first time in 2 years, the ranch account showed a positive balance above 4 figures. Luke found Jack in his barn that evening. Jack was replacing boards on the cattle chute, working in the golden light of late afternoon. Saw the deposit, we're solvent. For now. Dad, this was the right call. You know that, right? Jack hammered a nail, hit it harder than necessary. I know we didn't have another choice. That's not the same as right. We kept 380, that's what matters. Is it? Or did we just prove we're willing to sell when the pressure gets bad enough? What happens next time we're short? Sell another 40? Then another? Where's the line? Luke sat on the fence rail. The line is wherever you draw it, and you just drew it at 380 acres. That's still a ranch. That's still something worth fighting for. Jack has set down the hammer, looked at his son. You're more optimistic than I am. Someone has to be. They worked together until dark, repairing fence and gates and the 100 small things that broke on a ranch. When they finished, Jack stood in the doorway of the barn, looking out across land that was smaller now, but still his. 380 acres rolling away in the gathering darkness. He'd held for 2 years, had 2 or 3 more to go until the development corridor reached him. 2 more years of grinding poverty and impossible decisions, but he'd survived. That counted for something. The summer passed in work and heat in the slow turning of seasons. Jack took teaching jobs when he could, saved what little was left after expenses. Luke and Rebecca settled into the rhythm of young parents, up at dawn with Emily, exhausted by sunset, living on coffee and determination. Ben called in August. Jack hadn't heard from him since the loan extension. "Dad, I wanted to let you know. I paid off the bank. The $18,000, it's done." Jack felt something loosen in his chest. "That's good, son. Real good. Took everything I had, sold my truck, bought a used one, cashed in my retirement early, paid the penalties. But I'm out. I'm free. How's the job? Still have it, barely. But I'm staying clean, no gambling, no stupid investments, just work and family and trying to rebuild. I'm proud of you." Silence on the line, then Ben's voice thick with emotion. "That's the first time you've said that. In my whole life. Can't be the first time." "It is, and Dad, I need to say something. You were right about the land, about holding. I didn't see it then, but I see it now. You weren't being stubborn. You were being strategic. There's a difference. Sometimes they look the same from the outside." "Yeah, but you knew the difference. That's what matters." They talked for another 10 minutes, mostly small things. Ben's kids, Rebecca and Emily, the weather, normal conversation between father and son. When they hung up, Jack sat at the kitchen table feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Not happiness exactly, but maybe hope. The sense that broken things could be repaired if you were patient enough. The Interstate 35 extension opened in November of '75. A ribbon-cutting ceremony in Georgetown, state officials giving speeches about progress and infrastructure and the future of Texas. Jack drove up to watch, stood at the back of the crowd while dignitaries cut a red ribbon and the first cars rolled north on fresh asphalt. The highway ran clean and straight through land that had been ranch country 6 months ago. Perfect engineering, precise grading. Nothing left of what came before except the shape of the land itself, and even that had been bent to accommodate the road. Jack watched a state senator give a speech about economic opportunity, about connecting communities, about the bright future that infrastructure made possible. The crowd applauded at the appropriate moments. Local business owners beamed. Chamber of Commerce types handed out pamphlets about the new Texas, the growing Texas, the Texas that would lead America into the 21st century. Nobody mentioned the ranchers whose land had been taken through eminent domain, the families who'd been offered pennies on the dollar and told it was for the public good. The old man Jack had stood next to at the groundbreaking who'd said they're going to pave this whole country eventually. Signs pointed to exits that didn't exist yet, anticipating towns that would grow up around the interchanges. Exit 43, Georgetown. Exit 47, Round Rock. Exit 52, Future Development. That last one caught Jack's attention. Future Development. Not even a name yet. Just certainty that something would be built there because highways created destinations. Jack could see the pattern forming in real time. Here would be a gas station, probably a Texaco or Shell, open 24 hours for travelers. There a convenience store, 7-Eleven most likely, selling coffee and cigarettes and lottery tickets. Further out, subdivisions with names like Oak Creek Estates or Hill Country Ranch, ironic names celebrating what they'd destroyed. Then shopping centers, chain restaurants, car dealerships, all the apparatus of suburban life spreading like moss across rock. His 380 acres sat 3 miles from the nearest interchange, close enough to benefit from the proximity, far enough to avoid the immediate development pressure. Perfect position for someone willing to wait another year or two. Perfect position for someone who'd studied maps and traffic patterns and understood how infrastructure created value. Red Patterson stood next to him in the crowd. Jack hadn't seen him approach. There it is. The highway that's going to change everything. "You think it'll happen as fast as they're saying?" Red pulled out his pipe, didn't light it because of the crowd. "Faster. Mark my words, Jack. 2 years from now, this land will be unrecognizable. 5 years, you won't even remember what it looked like before. That good or bad? Depends on whether you own land or just live here. For you, it's good. For folks who sold too early, it's going to hurt watching what they missed. You think they'll regret it?" Red looked at the crowd, all those smiling faces celebrating progress. "Some already do. They just don't know it yet." The ribbon cutting happened. Cameras flashed. Someone released balloons that drifted away on a north wind. A high school band played the state song. Normal people celebrating normal progress. having no idea they were watching the death of a way of life that had existed since Texas was a republic. Jack stayed until the ceremony ended and the crowd dispersed to their cars. Stood at the fence line looking at the highway, this river of concrete that would carry millions of people north from Austin over the next 50 years. Billions of dollars of commerce. Entire lives changed by the simple fact of easier travel. And he owned land 3 miles from it, land that would soon be in the path of all that money, all that growth, all that inevitable change. Jack drove home thinking about change and time and the way the future arrived, whether you were ready or not. He'd bet everything on the future arriving in a specific way, at a specific time, to a specific piece of land. So far, the bet was holding. The highway had come. Development would follow. But 2 more years was a long time. A lot could still go wrong. Winter came early that year. First freeze in late October, temperatures dropping into the 20s overnight. Jack woke one morning to find the pipes in the barn frozen solid. Spent 4 hours with heat tape and a propane torch, trying to thaw lines without breaking them. Luke helped, the two of them working in cold that made their fingers ache despite gloves. Emily watched from Rebecca's arms in the doorway, bundled in blankets, her breath making small clouds in the frigid air. Jack thought about his father, dead at 71 from a heart attack while working in weather just like this. Thought about himself at 50, feeling 70, wondering how many more winters his body could take. The pipes thawed, water flowed again. Small victory in an endless war against entropy. The letter arrived in December, forwarded from Patricia Mills, the realtor. Inside was a cashier's check for $2,000 and a note on expensive letterhead. Greer Development Corporation, Austin, Texas. Mr. Monroe, we are prepared to purchase the remaining 380 acres of your property at $750 per acre. Total purchase price, $285,000. This is a premium offer based on our need to consolidate land holdings in the Interstate 35 corridor. Please contact us at your earliest convenience. Sincerely, Simon Greer, President. Jack read it twice. $285. More than 10 times what the land had been worth 3 years ago when Kellerman first approached him. Enough to pay off every debt, set up Luke and Ben, retire comfortably. He carried the letter to Red Patterson's house, showed him without comment. Red read it, whistled low. That's serious money, Jack. It is. You thinking about taking it? Thinking about it and doing it are different things. Red handed back the letter. You know what this means, don't you? Greer's not offering premium because he's generous. He's offering premium because he knows what that land will be worth in 2 years. He's trying to lock you in before the price goes higher. How much higher? Red did math on a napkin. Interstate's open. Interchanges are in. Development will start in earnest next spring. Land this close to major access. With this much acreage, you're looking at 1,200, maybe 1,500 an acre by late 77. Could be 450, 500,000 total. So I should hold. I can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you what I'd do. I'd tell Greer thanks, but no thanks. And I'd start planning for what comes next. What comes next? You don't just hold land forever, Jack. Eventually, you have to decide what to do with it. Sell it whole, divide it, develop it yourself. That's the next question. And it's coming sooner than you think. Jack drove home with the letter on the passenger seat. $285,000. Life-changing money. The kind of money that meant never worrying again about property taxes or equipment repairs or whether you could afford next month's feed bill. But Red was right. Greer knew something, was offering premium to avoid paying ultra-premium later, which meant Jack's thesis had been correct from the beginning. The land was valuable, would become more valuable. All he had to do was keep holding. Keep holding through winter, through spring, through whatever crisis came next, because there was always a next crisis. He showed the letter to Luke that night. Luke read it, set it on the table, looked at his father. That's a lot of money, Dad. It is. More than we ever imagined 3 years ago. More than I ever imagined in my whole life. Luke pushed the letter back across the table. But it's not enough, is it? Jack smiled. No, son, it's not enough. How will you know when it is enough? When I'm not betting anymore. When I'm collecting. There's a difference. They burned the letter in the wood stove. Watched $285,000 curl into ash. Jack felt something like relief. Every time he said no to a big number, it got easier to say no to the next one. Like building a muscle, strengthening resolve through repetition. January of '76 brought another tax bill, $1,500 this time because the county had reassessed based on development potential. Jack paid it from savings. Watch the balance drop. 5 more months until teaching jobs started again. 5 more months of living on cattle sales and Luke's salary and faith that the pattern would hold. Ben visited in February, drove down from Houston with his family. Jack hadn't seen his oldest son in over a year. Ben looked healthier, fuller in the face, eyes clear in a way they hadn't been before. They stood on the porch after dinner while the kids played in the yard. Ben's 2 boys and Emily, 3 kids who didn't know or care about land values and development patterns. They just ran and laughed and lived in the moment. Dad, I owe you an apology. You've already apologized. Not for the loan, for everything. For doubting you, for pressuring you to sell, for thinking I knew better. I was wrong about all of it. You were protecting yourself. Nothing wrong with that. There is when it makes you blind. I couldn't see past my own fear. Couldn't see that you were playing a longer game. Now I see it, and I'm sorry I made it harder. Jack put his hand on his son's shoulder. You made it exactly as hard as it needed to be. Kept me honest. Kept me questioning whether I was right. That's not a bad thing. Even when I was gambling away your future, even then, because you came back, made it right. That takes courage. They watched the kids play until the sun set and mosquitoes drove everyone inside. That night, lying in bed, Jack thought about redemption and second chances and the way families broke and healed and broke again. Nothing was permanent, not failure, not success, just the daily work of holding on and hoping tomorrow was better than today. Spring of '76 brought the announcement everyone had been waiting for. Intel Corporation was building a semiconductor fabrication plant 15 miles north of Austin. Construction would begin immediately. Full operations by 1978. The facility would employ 3,000 people initially, with expansion potential for 10,000. The news hit the local papers like a bomb. Front page of the Austin American-Statesman. Lead story on local television. Radio stations talking about nothing else. Intel was coming to Texas. The tech industry was coming to Texas. The future was arriving ahead of schedule. Land prices jumped 20% overnight. Parcels that had been listed for months sold in days. Developers who'd been cautious became aggressive, making offers sight unseen, buying anything within 10 miles of the proposed Intel site. Small ranches started selling, consolidating into larger developments with names that hadn't been invented yet, but would sound like Hill Country something or Live Oak something. Jack got 3 calls in 1 week. Kellerman offering $400,000. Greer offering $450,000. A third developer he'd never heard of, named like Davidson or Davison, offering $500,000 straight cash, close in 30 days, no contingencies. He said no to all of them. Luke asked him why at dinner one night. Rebecca listened while feeding Emily strained peas, the baby nearly 2 now, talking in sentences that mostly made sense, asking why about everything the way 2-year-olds do. Why am I not selling? Yeah, $500,000, Dad. That's generational wealth. That's never worrying about money again. That's Emily going to college. That's me and Rebecca not having to work ourselves to death before we're 40. Jack has set down his fork. It is all those things, but it's not peak value. Intel's here now. Others will follow. AMD, Motorola, maybe more. This is just the beginning of the tech boom. Land's going to keep appreciating for years. How do you know? Same way I knew the highway was coming. Same way I knew development would follow. I read, I study, I pay attention to patterns. There are articles in Electronics magazine about semiconductor manufacturing, about how companies cluster near each other because they need the same resources. Engineers, water, transportation, educated workforce. Austin has all of that. Intel's the first, won't be the last. And if you're wrong, then I'm wrong at $500,000 instead of $100,000. I can live with that. Rebecca spoke up, surprising both men. Her voice was quiet but firm. Mr. Monroe, can I say something? Of course. I've been keeping the books, doing the math. Even with the Intel announcement, even with land prices going up, we're still living month to month. One bad season and we're in trouble again. One major equipment failure and we can't recover. $500,000 would end that. Would give us actual security instead of theoretical future security. She shifted Emily to her other hip, continued. I work 40 hours a week at the clerk's office, make $280 every 2 weeks. Luke works the ranch dawn to dark every day. You teach and work, and you're 51 years old and you look 70. We're all exhausted, all the time. And for what? So we can maybe be rich in 2 more years? Maybe. Jack looked at his daughter-in-law. She was 24, raising a child on a struggling ranch, working full-time, living in a house that needed repairs they couldn't afford. She'd married Luke expecting a normal life. Got this instead. You're right about everything you said. The exhaustion is real, the risk is real, the uncertainty is real. But let me ask you something. What's Luke going to do if we sell? Get a job in Austin? Sit in an office, work for someone else building their dream while he gave up his own? Rebecca's jaw tightened. At least he'd be working somewhere with health insurance, with a retirement plan, with weekends off and paid vacation. Maybe that's not romantic, but it's real. It is real. But here's what's also real. We sell for $500,000 after taxes and paying off debts. We clear maybe $350. Split 3 ways for me and the boys. That's $116 each. Luke uses his share to buy a house in Austin, gets a Jone, works 40 years, retires with a pension. That's one path. And the other path? We hold 2 more years. Sell for over $1 million. Luke's share is $350. He uses that to buy more land, not less. Build something real. Create something that lasts beyond one generation. Emily grows up on a ranch instead of in a subdivision. Learns about work and land and patience. That's the other path. Rebecca looked at Luke. What do you want? Luke was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he said, I want what Dad's building. Not the money, the legacy. But Becca, I can't ask you to suffer for my dream. It's not just your dream anymore. It's Emily's future. And if your dad's right, if this pays off, she'll grow up with opportunities we never had. And if he's wrong? Rebecca looked at Jack. Then we'll have tried. That counts for something. Jack felt his throat tighten. She was 24 years old and wiser than he'd given her credit for. She understood the gamble, understood and she was choosing to stay anyway. Thank you, he said quietly. Rebecca nodded, went back to feeding Emily. But Jack could see the fear in her eyes, could see her calculating how long she could live this way. How many more years of barely making it before something inside her broke? That night, alone in his father's office, Jack pulled out the maps, studied the intel site location, calculated distances to his property. 2.3 miles from his eastern boundary, close enough that the impact would be significant. He drew circles on the map showing projected growth rings. 1 mile from intel in year 1, 2 miles in year 2, 3 miles in year 3. By late '77, development would be touching his property line. That's when he'd sell, not before, not when people were still speculating about what might happen, but when it was obvious to everyone, when the development was knocking on his door and the price reflected certainty instead of possibility. 2 more years, maybe less. He could do 2 more years, had to do 2 more years. Summer brought drought again. Not as bad as '73, but bad enough. Grass browned by July. Creek levels dropped. Cattle stood in what shade they could find, miserable in 100-degree heat. Jack worked through it, feeding hay he couldn't afford, hauling water to troughs, watching his savings evaporate like the moisture from the soil. Every morning he woke wondering if today would be the day something broke that he couldn't fix. But nothing broke. The tractor kept running, the cattle stayed healthy, the bank didn't call, small mercies that felt like miracles. Luke turned 24 that August. Jack threw a small party, just family, cake from the grocery store bakery. They sat on the porch in the evening, lightning bugs blinking in the pasture, Emily chasing them with a jar. 24, Jack said. I was 24 when I came back from Vietnam. Felt like 100. You look 100 now. Thanks, son. Luke smiled. Dad, I need to tell you something. Rebecca's pregnant again. Jack felt his heart skip. When? February. Right after your birthday. Congratulations. That's wonderful. Luke looked out at the pasture. Is it? Another kid on a ranch that barely supports one? Rebecca's already talking about moving, getting a real job, finding stability. What do you want? I want this to work. Want the gamble to pay off. Want to look back in 20 years and know we did the right thing. But I'm scared, Dad. Scared we're going to lose everything. Fear's normal. It means you understand the stakes. How do you deal with it? Jack thought about Vietnam, about Linda dying, about 2 years of barely surviving while everyone called him a fool. You don't deal with it. You carry it, and you keep moving anyway. They sat until full dark, watching Emily chase lightning bugs, listening to crickets and the distant sound of cattle settling for the night. Jack thought about the 2 grandchildren he'd have by next year. 2 more lives, depending on decisions he'd made before they were born. The weight of it should have crushed him, but somehow it made him stronger, gave him purpose beyond just surviving. He was building something now, creating a legacy that would outlast him, if he could just hold on a little longer. Fall of '76 brought elections. Carter beat Ford in a close race that had the whole country arguing about energy policy and inflation and whether America's best days were behind it. Jack voted but didn't care much either way. National politics seemed irrelevant when you were fighting daily battles with poverty and time. What mattered infinitely more, was the local bond election. Travis County was voting on $40 million for water and sewer expansion. The proposed extensions would run north along the Interstate 35 corridor, bringing infrastructure to land that currently had nothing but wells and septic. Jack studied the bond proposal like it was a military intelligence report. Read every page of the environmental impact statement, studied the engineering plans, traced the proposed routes on his county maps. The water lines would reach within 1 mile of his property by late '77. Sewer would follow by '78, and land with water and sewer was worth double, sometimes triple, what land without it was worth. He went to the public hearings, sat in the back of county commission meetings while engineers presented plans and commissioners asked questions and citizens complained about taxes. Nobody paid attention to the quiet man in the back row taking notes. Nobody realized he was calculating how millions of dollars in public infrastructure would turn his private land into a fortune. The bond passed by 62%, higher than anyone expected. The Growth Coalition, developers and realtors and business owners, had done their job. Convinced voters that infrastructure meant progress. Progress meant jobs. Jobs meant prosperity. They were right, of course, but they didn't mention who would profit most from that prosperity. Jack stayed up late election night, sitting at the kitchen table with his maps and calculator. Luke had gone to bed. Rebecca, too. Only Jack remained, working by lamplight, running numbers that had lived in his head for 4 years. His 380 acres with water and sewer access in the Intel development corridor, with Interstate 35 frontage in the path of Austin's north expansion, 2 years from now, late '78. He wrote out scenarios on a legal pad, 3 columns, conservative, moderate, optimistic. Conservative estimate assumes slow development, cautious buyers, normal market conditions, land selling for $800 per acre. 380 times 800, 304,000. After paying off remaining debts, about 260 clear, split 3 ways, 86,000 each. Not bad, triple what Kellerman had offered in '73, but not life-changing. Moderate estimate assumes steady development, normal Intel impact, typical market appreciation. Land selling for $1,200 per acre, 380 times 1,200, 456,000. After debts, 390 clear. 130 each. Better. Solid return. 4 times the original offer. Enough to set up the boys, buy a comfortable retirement. Optimistic estimate assumed aggressive development, full Intel impact, multiple companies following. Infrastructure making the land perfect for immediate building. Land selling for $1,600 per acre. 380 times 1,600, 608,000. After debts, 520 clear, 173 each. Life-changing, generational wealth. The kind of money that meant Emily and the new baby could go to any college, could start businesses, could have opportunities Jack never dreamed of. He stared at the 3 scenarios, wrote them out cleanly, underlined the numbers. Conservative, 86,000 each. Moderate, 130 each. Optimistic, 173 each. Then he did something he hadn't done in 4 years. He calculated what he would have had if he'd taken Kellerman's original offer in 1973. $100,000 for 420 acres. After mortgage and debts, about 78,000 clear. Split 3 ways, 26,000 each. If he'd invested that in the S&P 500, grown at about 10% annually over 4 years, he'd have about 38,000 now. Instead, even in the conservative scenario, he'd have 86,000, more than double. In the moderate scenario, 130, more than triple. In the optimistic scenario, 173, more than quadruple. And he'd get there by doing exactly what everyone said was stupid. By holding when they said sell, by waiting when they said take the money, by believing in research and pattern recognition when they said he was gambling. Jack felt something loosen in his chest, something that had been tight for 4 years. He'd been right. The data proved it. The math confirmed it. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt, it had all been necessary. All been part of a strategy that was working exactly as he'd calculated. He leaned back in the chair, closed his eyes, felt exhaustion and relief wash over him in equal measure. 4 years ago, he'd been a recent widower with nothing but debt and land. Now he was a man on the edge of real wealth. Not lucky wealth, not inherited wealth, calculated, researched, earned through patience and discipline, and the courage to ignore everyone who called him a fool. He thought about Linda. Wished she could see this. Wished she could know that the medical bills and funeral costs and all the financial devastation her illness had caused, it was about to be erased. More than erased, transformed into something that would take care of their grandchildren. He thought about his father, dead in a field at 71. The old man would have understood, would have nodded once, that was all, and said something like, "Took you long enough." He thought about Ben and Luke, both men now, both with families, both trusting him to be right even when it looked like he was wrong. And he thought about Emily, asleep upstairs, and the new baby that would arrive in February. 2 grandchildren who would grow up in a world where their family had wealth. Not because they got lucky, but because their grandfather had been willing to hold on when everyone else let go. Jack Monroe, 51 years old, sat in the dark kitchen of a ranch house built in 1898 and allowed himself something he'd been too scared to feel before. Not just hope, certainty. Real certainty. The kind that came from knowing you'd been right all along. That the pain had purpose. That the sacrifice meant something. 2 more years, maybe less. Then he'd collect. Then he'd win. Then everyone who called him a fool would see that stubbornness and strategy looked the same from the outside but were completely different on the inside. But tonight, alone in the darkness with only maps and calculations and hope for company, Jack whispered the words he'd been too afraid to say out loud for 4 years. "I was right. We're going to make it. It's really going to happen." The land didn't answer. It never did. But Jack felt the truth of it in his bones anyway. Felt the pattern completing. Felt the future arriving right on schedule. He just had to hold on a little longer. Just a little longer. And then it would all be worth it. Every sleepless night, every impossible decision, every moment of doubt, all of it would be worth it. Jack folded the legal pad, put away the calculator, turned off the lamp, walked through the dark house to bed, carrying the certainty like a weight that had finally become light. 2 more years. He could do 2 more years. Hell, after 4 years of this, 2 more felt like nothing. The hard part was over. Now came the reward. He just had to be patient a little longer. Just a little longer. The call came on a Tuesday morning in February 1977. Jack was in the barn, replacing a section of fence that had rotted through, when Luke came running across the pasture. His boots kicked up mud from the overnight rain. His face was flushed despite the cold. "Dad?" "Phone, it's a lawyer from Austin." Jack set down the post hole diggers, walked back to the house wiping his hands on his jeans. The phone sat off the hook on the kitchen counter. He picked it up, heard a woman's voice. Professional, confident. The kind of voice that charged by the hour and won cases in courtrooms. "Mr. Monroe, my name is Catherine Price. I represent Bergstrom Development Group. We're prepared to make you an offer for your property." "Not interested." "Mr. Monroe, you haven't heard the offer." "Don't need to. Not selling." $750 to $1,000. Cash, 30-day close. Jack felt something catch in his throat. $750. Double what Greer had offered 6 months ago, nearly 8 times what Kellerman had offered in '73. The number hung in the air like smoke, solid enough to see, impossible to hold. He looked out the kitchen window. Luke was standing on the porch watching through the glass. Rebecca was at the table feeding 2-year-old Emily breakfast. The morning light made everything look clean and simple, like problems could be solved with the right words. "What's the catch?" Catherine Price's voice took on an edge. "No catch, Mr. Monroe. We need your land to complete a master plan community. 3,000 homes, shopping center, 2 elementary schools, parks, trails. Your 380 is the keystone parcel. Without it, the entire project doesn't work. With it, we're looking at a development worth $200 million. And if I say no, then we develop around you and your land becomes less valuable, not more. Island parcels don't command premium prices, Mr. Monroe. They command desperation prices when owners realize they're surrounded." Jack felt anger rise in his chest. That's a threat. It's a fact. I'm trying to help you understand the market dynamics you're facing. I understand market dynamics better than you think, Miss Price. I've been studying them for 5 years while everyone told me I was crazy. Now you're offering me $750 because you know what I know. That land is going to be worth more, not less. That development can't happen without my piece. That you need me more than I need you. Silence on the line. When Catherine Price spoke again, her voice was colder. We could pursue eminent domain. You could try. But this isn't a public project. You're a private developer building subdivisions. Good luck convincing a Travis County judge that your profit margin serves the public good enough to seize private property. Texas courts don't look kindly on that kind of overreach. Mr. Monroe, I've been practicing real estate law for 15 years. I've seen stubborn landowners before. They always lose, not because they're wrong, but because they run out of time and money before the developers run out of patience. You're fighting momentum. You can't win. Maybe I can't, but I can make it expensive for you to prove it. Another silence. Then Catherine's voice, professional again, but with something underneath. Respect maybe, or calculation. You're making a mistake, Mr. Monroe, but it's your mistake to make. My client authorized me to go as high as $800,000. That offer is on the table for 48 hours. After that, we move forward without you. I appreciate the offer, Miss Price. Tell your client I said no. Jack hung up before she could respond. Stood at the window feeling his heart pound, adrenaline coursing through him like he'd just finished a fight. 750,000, 800,000 if he'd played it different. More money than his father had earned in 70 years of work. More money than 3 generations of Monroes had seen combined. But not enough, not yet. Not when he knew, truly knew, that the number would go higher if he just held a little longer. Luke came in from the porch where he'd been listening. Dad, that was $750,000. I know, and you just turned it down. I did. Why? Jack pulled out the legal pass where he'd done his calculations election night. Showed Luke the 3 scenarios. Conservative, moderate, optimistic. 750 is between moderate and optimistic, which means we're close. Another year, maybe 18 months, and we'll hit optimistic, maybe exceed it. Or maybe this is the peak. Maybe land values plateau. Maybe we never get another offer this good. Maybe, but I don't think so. Intel's just starting construction, won't be operational until late '78. When it opens, when 3,000 jobs come online, when all those engineers need places to live, that's when land values really jump. We're not at peak, we're at the base of the final climb. You sound certain. I am certain. For the first time in 4 years, I'm not guessing. I'm reading data. Luke nodded slowly. Okay, but Dad, Rebecca's pregnant again. Due in August, that's 2 kids. We need to think about space, money, stability. I know. And in 18 months, we'll have more stability than you can imagine. Luke left to finish the morning feeding. Jack remained at the window, watching the sun climb over land that had broken 3 generations, but might finally reward the 4th. The pressure intensified over the next 3 months. Developers called weekly. Some offered $800,000. One offered $850,000. Another offered $900,000 with a bonus if Jack closed in 30 days. He refused them all. People in town stopped pretending to understand. Bob Wilson, working the counter at the feed store now, shook his head when Jack came in for supplies. Jack, you've lost your mind. $900,000 and you said no. I did. Why? What are you waiting for? The right price. And what's the right price? $1 million? $2 million? At what point does the number get big enough? When it stops being about the number and starts being about the certainty. Bob rang up the feed bags, salt blocks, mineral supplements. That'll be $87.50. Jack paid in cash, bills worn from being folded in his wallet. Bob made change slowly, like he was counting out Jack's sanity coin by coin. You know what your problem is? You got lucky once. Highway came like you said it would. So now you think you're smarter than everyone. But luck runs out, Jack. And when it does, you're going to wish you'd taken one of these offers. Maybe. But I'd rather regret holding too long than selling too early. He drove home thinking about luck versus skill. Everyone wanted to believe his success was luck because luck was random, couldn't be taught or learned or replicated. But if it was skill, if it was research and pattern recognition and disciplined analysis, then they'd have to admit they could have done it too, could have studied the maps, could have attended the planning meetings. Could have bet on infrastructure instead of selling for quick money. Easier to call it luck. Easier to believe Jack was a fool who got lucky than a strategist who'd been right all along. Rebecca had the baby in August, another girl. They named her Sarah after Jack's mother. Luke brought her home to a ranch house that was getting crowded. Emily was 2.5 now, running through rooms, asking questions, getting into everything. Sarah cried at night and slept during the day, that backwards schedule newborns have. Jack held his second granddaughter on the porch one evening while Rebecca slept, and Luke worked and Emily played in the yard. Sarah was tiny, red-faced, perfect. She looked at him with unfocused eyes that would sharpen over weeks into recognition. "Your grandpa's gambling your future on maps and calculations," he whispered. "Hope that doesn't seem too crazy 20 years from now." Ben drove down from Houston in September, brought his family for Sunday dinner. His boys were 7 and 9 now, playing with Emily, teaching her games. Ben looked healthy, solid, like a man who'd figured some things out. After dinner, the men stood in the yard while the women cleaned up and the kids played. Ben pulled out a cigar, offered one to Jack. Jack declined. Luke took one. "Dad, I wanted to tell you something. My boss offered me a promotion, senior petroleum engineer. It's a good bump in salary, but I turned it down." Jack looked at his oldest son. "Why?" "Because it would mean more travel, more time away from family. And I've learned something these past few years. Time is worth more than money, at least up to a certain point. That's wisdom. I learned it from watching you. You could have sold and retired, could have bought time, but you chose to work and hold. Chose to bet on the future instead of cashing out for the present. That takes a different kind of courage. Or stupidity. Sometimes they look the same." Ben laughed, blue smoke that drifted away on the evening breeze. "Maybe. But you were right about the land, right about the highway, intel, development. You saw the pattern when nobody else did. That's not luck. That's intelligence applied over time." "I appreciate you saying that." Ben looked at the land, 380 acres stretching away into the dusk. "How long are you going to hold?" "Until the price is right." "And when will that be?" "When developers stop calling because they've accepted I won't sell below my number. When the market comes to me instead of me going to the market. When I have leverage instead of need." "That could be years." "Could be. But it could also be months. Intel opens next year. When it does, everything changes." They stood in silence, 3 generations, watching the sun set over land that had nearly destroyed them, but hadn't. Not quite. Not yet. Fall of '77 brought the first signs Jack had been waiting for. Construction started on 2 major subdivisions within 5 miles of his property. Oak Hill Estates to the south, 300 homes. Brushy Creek Ranch to the north, 500 homes. Both priced in the 40 to 60,000 range. Both selling fast. The math was simple. 800 homes at an average of 50,000 each. $40 million in residential real estate being built within a 10-minute drive of Jack's land. And those homeowners would need services, shopping, restaurants, gas stations, all of which needed land. His land. Jack started getting calls from commercial developers. Not residential builders, but the bigger players. People who built strip malls and grocery stores and medical offices. They wanted 3 to 5 acre parcels with highway visibility. Were willing to pay commercial rates. One offer stood out, a shopping center developer out of Dallas named Frank Morrison. He called in October with a proposal that made Jack sit down at the kitchen table, reach for a pen, start taking notes. "Mr. Monroe, I've been watching your situation for 2 years. I know about the offers you've turned down. I know you're holding for a reason. And I want to propose something different. Something that doesn't require you to sell." "I'm listening." "I don't want to buy your land. I want to lease it. 20-year ground lease. You keep ownership. I develop a neighborhood shopping center. 15,000 square feet initially, with expansion options to 25,000 if the market supports it. Grocery store anchor, probably an H-E-B or Safeway. Pharmacy, maybe a bank branch. Dollar store. Whatever the demographics support. And what do I get out of this?" Morrison's voice was steady, like he'd rehearsed this pitch 100 times. $12,000 per year in lease payments for the first 10 years. That's guaranteed, regardless of whether I have tenants or not. I'm taking all the risk. You're getting stable income while keeping your equity. Jack did quick math. $12,000 a year was more than the ranch had ever netted from cattle. More than his teaching income. It was real money, predictable money, the kind that lets you plan instead of just survive. "What happens after 10 years? Years 11 through 20, the payment goes up to $15,000 annually. And here's the beautiful part. At the end of 20 years, the lease expires and you own the land plus all the improvements. The building, the parking lot, everything. You can renew with me at a higher rate, you can lease to someone else, or you can sell the whole package to a developer for probably triple what the raw land is worth. Jack wrote out the numbers. 12,000 times 10 equaled 120. 15,000 times 10 equaled 150. 270 total over 20 years. Plus he'd still own the land, plus improvements that would add value. What's the catch? There's always a catch. Morrison laughed. The catch is I make more money than you do. Way more. That grocery store is going to pay me $10,000 a month in rent. Pharmacy pays $5,000. Other tenants fill in the gaps. I'm probably clearing $120,000, maybe $150,000 a year after your ground lease and my operating expenses. We both win, but I win bigger. That's the catch. At least you're honest about it. I can afford to be honest because the deal makes sense for both of us. You get income without selling equity. I get a location in the fastest growing corridor in Texas without the capital outlay of buying land. It's textbook win-win. Let me think about it. Take your time. But Jack, and I hope you don't mind me calling you Jack, the market window won't stay open forever. Right now we're at the sweet spot. Early enough that land's still reasonable, late enough that there's actual demand. In 2 years, this deal won't make sense because you'll be able to sell for so much more. In 2 years, I won't offer it because land costs will eat my margins. This is the moment, the brief window when this specific deal works for both of us. Jack hung up and stared at the wall for a long time. Morrison was smart, smarter than the other developers who'd just thrown money at the problem. He understood Jack wasn't motivated by quick cash, was motivated by building something sustainable. The lease did that, generated income while preserving the core asset. He showed Luke the proposal that night. Luke read it twice, looked up with something like wonder. Dad, this is it. This is the play. We keep the land, generate income, and the land keeps appreciating. It's perfect. It might be, but I want Red to look at it first. They drove to Red Patterson's house the next morning. Red was 75 now, moving slower, but his mind was sharp as ever. He read the proposal, made notes on the margins, asked questions Jack hadn't thought to ask. What happens if Morrison's company goes bankrupt 5 years in? Who's responsible for removing the improvements? What's the renewal clause? Can you terminate early if a better offer comes along? What about property tax increases? Who pays those? I don't know. Then find out. This is a good proposal, Jack. But good proposals have details that make or break them. Don't sign anything until you understand every clause. Jack called Morrison back, asked the questions. Morrison had answers for most of them. The ones he didn't have answers for, he worked with Jack to address. Over the next 3 weeks, they negotiated a lease agreement that protected both parties. 20-year ground lease, $12,000 annually for first 10 years, $15,000 for second 10 years. Morrison responsible for all improvements and maintenance. Jack responsible for property taxes, but could terminate with 6 months' notice if he received a purchase offer exceeding $1.2 million. That last clause was Jack's addition, his escape hatch. If someone offered him more than the lease was worth, he could walk away. Until then, he generated income while the land appreciated. They signed in late November. Jack deposited the first year's payment, $12,000, into the ranch account. It was the most money that account had ever held at one time. Luke saw the deposit slip, sat down at the kitchen table like his legs had stopped working. We're profitable. For the first time since I can remember, we're actually profitable. Jack allowed himself a small smile. We're getting there. Getting there, Dad? $12,000 from the lease plus what the ranch generates plus Rebecca's income. We're clearing maybe $25,000 this year. That's more than we've made in the last 4 years combined. It's a start. That night, Jack pulled out his calculation pad, updated his projections based on the new reality. The lease would generate $260,000 over 20 years. The land would continue appreciating. By the time the lease ended in '97, the property would probably be worth $2 million or more. Or he could sell now, let Morrison buy the land outright, probably get $850,000 to $900,000 based on recent comparables. But the lease was smarter, generated income while preserving equity, let him wait for the absolute peak of the market instead of guessing when peak arrived. He'd made the right call. Again, Intel opened for operations in March of '78. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was even bigger than the highway opening. National media showed up. CBS Evening News ran a segment. Business Week did a feature article. State politicians came from Austin and Washington, giving speeches about technology and the future and how Texas was going to lead America into the next century. The Intel executives talked about their plans, starting with 3,000 employees but projecting growth to 10,000 within 5 years. The facility would manufacture semiconductors, the tiny chips that powered computers and calculators, and the coming wave of consumer electronics. They needed engineers, technicians, support staff, needed housing for all those people, needed shopping and restaurants and schools and everything else that makes a community function. Jack stood at the back of the crowd watching history happen. The factory was massive, 1,000,000 square feet of clean rooms and manufacturing space, parking lots that would hold thousands of cars, loading docks for trucks, bringing in raw materials, and taking out finished chips worth millions. And his land was 2.3 miles away, close enough that Intel employees would drive past it every day, close enough that when they looked for housing, they'd end up in developments built on land like his, close enough that the shopping center Morrison was building would serve them. The announcement had the effect Jack predicted. Land prices jumped 30% in 4 weeks. Property that had been selling for $800 an acre in January was selling for $1,000 or more in April. Property with highway frontage, commercial zoning potential, proximity to Intel, those parcels were going for $1,200 or more. Jack's 380 acres ticked every box. Highway visibility, commercial lease already in place generating income. Right in the Intel corridor, suddenly conservatively worth over $1 million. The offers reflected the new reality. Kellerman called with $1.1 million. Greer called with $1.2. A developer from California that Jack had never heard of offered $1.3, all cash, close in 2 weeks, no contingencies, just sign here and walk away rich. Jack turned them all down, every single one. Said no to more money than existed in his imagination 5 years ago. Said no because the pattern still hadn't completed. Because Intel was open but not at full capacity. Because the real boom, the real explosion of growth, that was still 6 months out, maybe a year, when Intel ramped to full production and started hiring aggressively and thousands of people moved to Austin looking for work. Luke asked him about it one evening. They were sitting on the porch like they did most nights, drinking beer, watching the sunset. Emily was 3.5 now, talking in full sentences, already showing signs of her mother's practicality. Sarah was 9 months old, crawling everywhere, getting into everything. Rebecca was pregnant again, due in December. The third child neither of them had planned but both welcomed. Dad, I need to ask you something and I need you to be straight with me. Always. At what point is it enough? $1.3 million. That's life-changing money for everyone. We split it 3 ways, that's $430 each after taxes and debts. I could buy land, real land, not just work yours. Could set up Emily and Sarah and the baby coming. Could give Rebecca a house that doesn't leak when it rains. Why are we still holding? Jack took a long pull from his beer. Because the pattern hasn't completed yet. Intel's open but running at maybe 20% capacity. Takes time to ramp up semiconductor manufacturing. Probably 18 months before they're running 3 shifts. 2 years before they hit their employment targets. When that happens, when 3,000 becomes 5,000, becomes 7,000. That's when land prices really jump. Not just up, explode. You sound certain. I am certain. For the first time in 5 years, I'm not guessing based on projections. I'm watching it happen in real time. Every week, more engineers move to Austin. Every week, more housing gets built and sold immediately. Every week, land prices tick up. We're not at peak. We're not even close to peak. We're at base camp looking up at the summit. And if you're wrong, if this is peak and it drops from here, then we're wrong at 1.3 million instead of 100,000. That's still a win. Luke nodded slowly, thinking. You've been playing a longer game than anyone else even knew existed. Your grandfather used to say the man with land and patience will outlast the man with money and impatience. I didn't understand it then. I was too busy trying to escape the ranch. But I understand it now. Patience isn't passive, it's strategic. It's having the discipline to wait when waiting is hard. How much longer do we wait? Until someone offers me $2 million. Luke laughed, then realized Jack was serious. $2 million? Dad, that's almost double the current offers. Today's offers, not tomorrow's. AMD just announced they're coming to Austin. Motorola's considering it. We're not just getting one semiconductor company, we're getting an entire industry cluster. And when that happens, land in this corridor will be worth whatever I say it's worth. Because supply is fixed and demand is about to go vertical. They sat in silence, watching the sun paint the sky orange and red. Somewhere in the distance, cars hummed on the interstate. Normal people going to normal jobs, not thinking about land or patience, or the difference between selling too early and selling at exactly the right moment. Ben called in June with news. His company was transferring him back to Austin. Not a demotion, a promotion. They were opening a new office to handle the oil fields in South Texas, wanted Ben to run it. Dad, I'm coming home. Well, close to home. We're buying a house in Austin. The boys will go to school there. We'll be 30 minutes away instead of 3 hours. That's wonderful, son. And Dad, I want to say something. I was wrong. About everything, about you holding the land, about calling you stubborn, about pressuring you to sell. You were right. You saw something nobody else saw, and you had the courage to hold until it paid off. Hasn't paid off yet, but it's going to. We all know it now. Even the people who called you crazy, they know. I appreciate you saying that. Ben was quiet for a moment. Dad, when you do sell, when you finally decide it's time, I want you to know something. My third of the money, whatever it is, I'm going to use it to buy land, not to speculate, but to hold. The way you taught me, the way Grandpa taught you, I'm going to build something for my boys the way you built this for us. Jack felt his throat tighten. That's the smartest thing I've heard you say in 10 years. I learned it from you. Took me a while, but I learned it. After they hung up, Jack walked out to the land, the 380 acres he'd held through poverty and doubt and pressure from every direction. The land that had nearly broken him but hadn't. The land that was about to make him wealthy beyond anything he'd imagined 5 years ago. He thought about his father, dead in this field at 71, wondered if the old man had known what the land would become, suspected he had, at least partially. That letter about making them pay for tomorrow instead of today, that wasn't about cattle prices. That was about seeing the future and having the patience to wait for it. Jack was 53 years old now, the same age his father had been when Jack was born. Young enough to enjoy the wealth that was coming. Old enough to understand it wasn't really about the money. It was about proving something, proving that discipline beat desperation, that research beat guessing, that one man with a library card and a map could beat Harvard MB, A's with computers and consultants. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and purple. Beautiful in that way Texas sunsets are, huge and dramatic and temporary. Tomorrow would bring another day of work, another set of decisions, another step forward. But tonight, Jack Monroe stood on land his family had held for 95 years and knew, truly knew, that they'd made it. The gamble had paid off. The pattern had held. The future he'd calculated 5 years ago was arriving exactly on schedule. AMD announced in August they were building a fab in Austin. Smaller than Intel, only 1,500 employees initially, but the signal was clear. Austin was becoming a tech hub. Not might become. Was becoming. Land prices jumped again. Jack's property was now conservatively worth $1.4 million, probably closer to $1.5. The lease with Morrison was generating income. The ranch was profitable for the first time in a decade, and Jack still wasn't selling. Rebecca asked him about it in September. She was 8 months pregnant, moving slowly, uncomfortable in the heat. They were sitting in the kitchen, Emily and Sarah playing in the next room, Luke out working fence. Mr. Monroe, can I ask you something? Of course. When are you going to sell? I don't mean that as pressure. I'm genuinely asking. What's the number? What's the sign you're waiting for? Jack thought about it. That's a good question. Honestly, I don't know the exact number. But I'll know the sign. It's when developers stop calling me and start accepting my price. When I set the number instead of responding to their offers. When I have complete leverage. And when will that be? Soon. Maybe 6 months. Maybe a year. But soon. And then what? You sell and we move? Luke and I start over somewhere else? Jack looked at her. She was 28, raising 2 daughters with a 3rd child coming, living in a house that was too small and needed repairs. She'd earned the right to ask hard questions. Rebecca, what do you want? Not what Luke wants or what I want. What do you want? She thought about it for a long time. I want security. I want my kids to have opportunities I didn't have. I want Luke to have land of his own, not just work yours. I want to look back in 20 years and know we did something that mattered. Then we're wanting the same things. And when I sell, that's exactly what you'll get. She nodded, rubbed her swollen belly. This one's kicking. Gonna be a fighter. Must be in the genes. The baby came in December, 2 weeks early. Another girl. They named her Grace. Jack held his third granddaughter in the hospital. This tiny person who'd been born into a family that was finally succeeding instead of just surviving. Luke looked exhausted and happy. 3 daughters, Dad. I'm outnumbered 4-1 with Rebecca. Could be worse. Could be broke. They laughed because it was true. 5 years ago, they'd been broke. Now they had income, equity, options. Not rich yet, but no longer poor. Somewhere in between, climbing towards something better. Jack drove home from the hospital thinking about time and patience and the slow accumulation of victories. He'd held for 5 years, refused offers totaling probably $7 million combined, lived through poverty and criticism and doubt. But he'd been right about the highway, about intel, about development patterns, about timing, about everything. And in another 6 months, maybe a year, he'd sell, would collect a number so large it would justify every sacrifice. But not yet, not until the moment was perfect, not until he had complete control. The call came in February of '79, not from a lawyer or an assistant, Simon Greer himself. Jack recognized the voice immediately, even though they had only spoken a handful of times over 6 years. Jack, it's Simon Greer. Do you have a few minutes? I've got time. Good. Because I want to have a conversation with you. Not as a developer trying to buy your land, but as one businessman to another. Man to man. Can we do that? We can. Greer took a breath. Jack heard it over the phone line. I've been in real estate development for 30 years. Started with nothing, built a company worth $80 million. I've seen boom and bust, made fortunes, lost fortunes, made them back again. I thought I understood land speculation better than anyone. Then I met you. Jack waited, said nothing. 6 years ago, I offered you $285,000. You said no. I thought you were crazy. 4 years ago, I offered you $450. You said no. I thought you were stubborn. 2 years ago, I offered you $900. You said no. I realized you were something else entirely. You were playing a different game than everyone else. What game is that? The long game, the patient game. The game where you don't move until you're certain, and when you move once, and you win completely. I respect that. Hell, I'm envious of it. Most developers, myself included, were too impatient. We see opportunity and we jump. Sometimes we win, sometimes we lose. But you waited, you studied, you calculated, and now you're sitting on land worth more than anyone imagined 6 years ago. Jack felt something strange. Not pride exactly, more like validation. The man who'd called him a fool was now calling him a strategist. Greer continued, I'm calling to make you a final offer. Not because I'm giving up, but because I'm acknowledging reality. You've won. You were right. I was wrong. And now I want to pay you what your land is actually worth, not what I can squeeze you down to. I'm listening. $1.7 million? Cash. 60-day close. You pick the title company. You set the terms. I'm not negotiating. I'm capitulating. That number is fair. It's competitive with anything else you'll get. And it's my way of saying, I understand what you did here, and I respect it. Jack looked out the window. The shopping center was visible from the house now. Morrison's H-E-B grocery sign bright against the evening sky. Cars filled the parking lot. Normal people buying groceries, not knowing they were shopping on land that had been cattle pasture 3 years ago. Simon, I appreciate the respect in that offer, I really do, but I'm not ready to sell. Greer's voice changed. Not angry, something else. Curious, maybe. Can I ask why? And I mean really why, not the strategic answer, the personal answer. What are you waiting for? Jack thought about it, tried to find words for something he barely understood himself. I'm waiting to not be afraid anymore. For 6 years, I've been scared every day. Scared I was wrong. Scared I'd lose everything. Scared I'd destroy my family, chasing something that didn't exist. And even now, with intel here and land prices up and everyone telling me I was right, I'm still scared. Because what if this is the peak? What if I hold too long and it all crashes? What if 1.7 is as good as it gets? So why not take it? Why not end the fear? Because I need to prove something to myself. Need to know I can hold all the way to the end. Not just until it's hard, but until it's complete. Until I set my number and the market meets it. Until I win on my terms, not theirs. And what's your number? 2 million. That's what this land is worth. That's what I'll take. Not 1.7, not 1.9, 2 million, or I keep holding. Silence on the line. Jack could hear Greer breathing, could imagine him in an office somewhere, probably Dallas, looking at spreadsheets and projections and trying to decide if Jack Monroe was a genius or insane. Finally, Greer spoke. You know what the difference is between you and me, Jack? I'm a developer. I make things, buildings, communities, wealth. But you're something else. You're an investor, pure investor. You don't make anything. You just hold and wait and trust that time will prove you right. That takes a different kind of courage than I have, or a different kind of stubbornness. Maybe they're the same thing. Greer paused. Jack, I've been in this business 30 years, and I've never met anyone like you. You're either the smartest investor I've ever encountered, or the luckiest fool who's about to lose everything. Time will tell which. But I'll say this, if you make it to 2 million, if someone actually pays you that, you'll have earned every dollar. Not through luck, through sheer force of will. I appreciate that, Simon. When you're ready to sell, and you will eventually be ready, call me first. I'll match any legitimate offer. You've earned that much. I'll keep that in mind. Jack hung up and sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Rebecca was feeding Grace in the high chair. Emily and Sarah were playing in the next room, their voices rising and falling in that particular music of young children. Luke was outside working on the tractor. Normal family life happening around him while Jack processed what had just occurred. Simon Greer, one of the biggest developers in Texas, had just offered him $1.7 million, and Jack had said no. Had told him the price was $2 million or nothing. Had drawn a line and dared the market to cross it. It was the most audacious thing Jack had ever done. More audacious than refusing Kellerman 6 years ago. More audacious than selling 40 acres to save 380. More audacious than leasing to Morrison instead of selling to Greer. Because now Jack wasn't just holding and hoping, he was dictating terms, setting the price, making the market come to him instead of chasing the market. He'd shifted from defense to offense, from survival to victory, from wondering if he'd make it to knowing he would. 2 million. The number sat in his mind like a destination on a map, visible now, reachable, just a matter of time and patience, and refusing to settle for anything less than what he knew the land was worth. Rebecca spoke without looking up from feeding Grace. Was that Greer? It was. How much? 1.7. And you said no. I said no. She nodded, wiped Grace's face. Good. We didn't come this far to settle for close enough. Jack looked at his daughter-in-law. 6 years ago, she'd been skeptical. 4 years ago, she'd been worried. 2 years ago, she'd wanted security. Now she was telling him to hold for 2 million. The family had changed, had grown into the vision he'd been carrying alone for so long. They were all believers now, all committed, all waiting for the same number. 2 million. It was going to happen. Jack knew it with the same certainty he'd known the highway was coming. The same certainty he'd known intel would arrive. The same certainty he'd known that patience would beat panic. The market would get there. Someone would pay it. And when they did, Jack Monroe would collect his reward for 6 years of the hardest work he'd ever done. The work of holding on when everyone said let go. The work of believing in data when everyone believed in luck. The work of waiting for tomorrow when everyone demanded today. 2 million. Just a little bit longer. Just a little bit longer, and it would all be perfect. The call came in June of 1979. Jack was 54 years old, sitting on the porch watching Emily and Sarah play in the yard while Rebecca held Grace in the shade. The phone rang inside. Luke answered, then appeared in the doorway with an expression Jack had never seen before. Not excitement, not worry, something else entirely. Dad, you need to take this. Who is it? Someone new. Jack walked inside, picked up the phone. The voice on the other end was young, confident, speaking with an accent Jack couldn't quite place. California, maybe, or somewhere east. Mr. Monroe, my name is David Chen. I represent Pacific Rim Investment Group. We're a real estate investment trust based in San Francisco. I'm calling because we've been authorized to make you an offer for your property. I'm not interested in offers below 2 million. Silence. Then Chen laughed. That's quite direct. I appreciate it. Saves us both time. Mr. Monroe, we're prepared to offer you exactly $2 million for your 380 acres. Cash, 45-day close, no contingencies. Jack felt the world slow down. The sounds from outside became distant. Rebecca's voice, the girls laughing, birds in the trees, everything compressed into this single moment, this single number, the number he'd been waiting for. Why 2 million? Chen's voice was matter of fact, because that's what it's worth. We've done extensive market analysis, comparable sales, development potential studies, traffic projections. Your land in this location, with the Morrison lease already generating income, with Intel and AMD establishing this corridor, with Austin's growth trajectory, it's worth 2 million. Maybe a bit more. We're offering fair value, not trying to steal it. And why now? Why not 6 months ago? Why not 6 months from now? Because 6 months ago, it was worth 1.7. 6 months from now, it might be worth 2.2. But we're buying now because now is when our fund has capital allocated for Texas acquisitions. We move fast, we pay fair, we close clean. Jack looked out the window. Luke was standing on the porch now, watching through the glass. He knew. Somehow he knew this was different. Can I have 24 hours to think about it? You can have 48, but Mr. Monroe, I should tell you something. We're making 3 offers this week. 3 properties in the Austin corridor. Whoever accepts first gets their deal. The other 2 will probably pass on. We have a finite amount of capital. So if you're serious about 2 million, don't wait too long. I'll call you tomorrow. Jack hung up and walked outside. Stood on the porch looking at land his family had held for 96 years. Land that had broken his grandfather during the Depression. Land that had killed his father with a heart attack at 71. Land that had nearly destroyed Jack through 5 years of poverty and doubt and pressure from every direction. And now someone was offering him $2 million for it. Luke came and stood next to him. Was that the call? It was. And $2 million. Cash, 45 days. Luke sat down on the porch steps like his legs had stopped working. Holy God. Yeah. Are you going to take it? Jack thought about everything that had led to this moment. Kellerman's offer in 73. Bob Wilson selling and losing everything. Red Patterson dying with the belief Jack would succeed. The countless nights doing calculations at the kitchen table. The highway opening. Intel arriving. AMD following. Every pattern completing exactly as predicted. I don't know yet. Dad, it's $2 million. That's your number. The number you've been saying for 2 years. It is. So what's the hesitation? Jack looked at his son. 27 years old now. 3 daughters. Working the ranch alongside his father. Becoming the kind of man who understood that some things mattered more than money. I'm hesitating because once I say yes, it's over. The gamble ends. The land is gone. We'll have money, but we won't have this. And I'm trying to figure out if I'm ready for that. You've been ready for 6 years. Have I? Or have I been so focused on getting here that I never thought about what happens after? They sat in silence. Rebecca came out with Grace, sat next to Luke. The girls kept playing, oblivious to the fact that their grandfather was deciding the future of the family. Rebecca spoke quietly. Mr. Monroe, if I can say something, you've earned this. You saw what nobody else saw. You held when everyone said sell. You were right about everything. Take the money, take the win. Let us all start the next chapter. Jack nodded. She was right. Of course she was right. This was what he'd been working toward. This was the goal, the destination, the reward for 6 years of the hardest work he'd ever done. But God, letting go was harder than holding on. That night, Jack called Red Patterson. The old man was 77 now, not doing well. Heart problems. Emphysema from 50 years of pipe smoking, but his mind was still sharp. Red, someone offered me $2 million. Red was quiet for a long moment. That's your number. It is. So why are you calling me? You know what to do. I'm calling because I need someone to tell me I'm not crazy for feeling sad about it. Red laughed, which turned into a cough. Jack, that's the most human thing you've said in 6 years. You're not crazy. That land has been in your family almost a century. Your grandfather fought to keep it during the Depression. Your father worked himself to death on it. You nearly lost everything holding on to it. Of course you're sad. Money doesn't fix that kind of loss. So what do? You take the money, you use it to build something new. You give your boys the chance to do what you did, but with capital instead of debt. You prove that the long game works, that patience wins, That one man with discipline can beat 1,000 men with impatience. That's a lot of weight to put on a real estate transaction. It's not a transaction, it's a legacy. You're not selling land, you're completing a journey. There's a difference. After they hung up, Jack sat in the dark office looking at the maps on the wall, the red line showing Interstate 35, the circles showing development rings spreading from Austin, the notes and calculations and projections that had proven correct over 6 years. He'd done it, actually done it, seen a pattern, believed in it, held through impossible circumstances and reached the goal. $2 million for land that had been worth $100,000 6 years ago, a 20 times return. Better than any investment he could have made anywhere. Better than the stock market. Better than millions. Better than anything except the specific strategy of buying land in the path of development and having the courage to wait. He pulled out the legal pad where he'd tracked offers over the years, wrote them out in chronological order. 1973, Kellerman, 100,000. Refused. 1975, Kellerman, 400,000. Refused. 1976, Greer, 650,000. Refused. 1977, Price, 750,000. Refused. 1978, multiple offers up to 1.3 million, all refused. 1979, Greer, 1.7 million. Refused. 1979, Chen, 2 million. Decision pending. 10 offers, almost $6 million in aggregate, all refused except possibly the last. He wrote one more line at the bottom. Total pain endured, incalculable. Total discipline required, absolute. Total vindication, complete. Then he picked up the phone and called David Chen. The deal closed on August 1st, 1979. Jack signed the papers in an Austin law office with Luke beside him. The closing took 3 hours. Documents stacked in piles. Signatures on every page. Title company representatives verifying chain of ownership going back to 1883. Wire transfer confirmations. Tax forms. Legal declarations. The lawyer walked them through each document. This transfers title. This confirms the survey boundaries are correct. This certifies no outstanding liens. This waives your right to contest the sale. This acknowledges you've received full payment. Jack signed each one mechanically, his hand moving across paper. Blue ink making it official, making it real, making it permanent. When the last signature was done, the lawyer handed Jack a cashier's check for $2,350,000. The extra $350,000 was from Morrison buying out the remaining 16 years of the ground lease, wanting clean title for whatever came next. Jack held the check in his hands. Thin paper, light as air, but representing 6 years of his life compressed into 9 digits. $2,350,000 and 0 cents. He thought about the weight of that number. Thought about how much $1 weighed, how much 100 weighed, how much 1,000 weighed. 2 million would be actual physical weight if it was cash. Would fill a room, would require a truck to move. But as a check, it weighed nothing. Just paper and ink and the promise that somewhere, in a bank account, numbers had been moved from one ledger to another. The land was gone. The money was here. Equal exchange according to the law. But it didn't feel equal. The land had existed for millions of years before the Monroes arrived and would exist for millions after. The money was temporary, would be spent or invested or lost or given away. The land was forever. The money was now. Luke looked at the check too. Dad, we did it. Yeah, we did. How do you feel? Jack thought about it. Numb. I feel numb. They drove back to the ranch in silence. Jack looked out the window at the landscape rolling past. This was all going to change. The land he'd just sold would be subdivided within a year. Developed within 2. 5 years from now, 3,000 families would live where cattle had grazed for a century. Progress, people called it. Growth. Development. The future. But sitting in the truck holding a check for $2 million, Jack felt like he'd participated in a kind of murder. Killed something old to birth something new. Necessary maybe, profitable certainly, but still, a kind of death. When they pulled up, Rebecca was on the porch with the girls. Ben had driven down from Austin with his family. Everyone was there. 3 generations of Monroes gathered to watch the land transfer out of the family for the first time since 1883. Jack got out of the truck, walked to the porch, held up the check. Everyone cheered. The girls jumped around, not understanding, but feeding off the adults' excitement. Ben grabbed Jack in a hug. Rebecca cried happy tears. But Jack felt something else. Not joy, not sadness. Something more complicated. Relief, maybe? Or exhaustion. The kind you feel after running a marathon. Glad it's over, but already missing the purpose it gave you. That night, after everyone had gone home and the girls were asleep, Jack and Luke sat on the porch one last time. The land was technically no longer theirs. The papers were signed, the money was deposited. But it still looked the same, still rolled away into darkness the way it had for 100 years. "What are you going to do with your share?" Luke asked. Jack had thought about this. 2.3 million, minus taxes, they'd clear about 1.7. Split three ways, roughly 567,000 each. Life-changing money, generational money, the kind that meant none of them would ever struggle again. "I'm going to buy a house in town, small place. Give you and Rebecca this house, this land, to raise the girls. I'm going to set up education trusts for Emily, Sarah, and Grace. Make sure they can go to any college they want. And I'm going to keep some back for whatever comes next." "What about investing? Buying more land?" Jack smiled. "I'm done with land. This was my one play, my one perfect read. I'm not going to try to repeat it. That's how you lose everything." "So you're retiring at 54. I'm retiring from ranching, not from living. There's a difference." "What's Ben going to do with his share?" "Buy land. He's already looking. Wants to buy 100 acres south of here. Hold it the way I held this. Prove he learned the lesson." "And me? What about you? What do you want me to do?" Jack looked at his son. "Luke, you're 27 years old. You've got 3 daughters and a wife and a life ahead of you. I don't get to tell you what to do, but I'll tell you what I hope. I hope you use your share to build something. Not necessarily land, but something real. Something that lasts. Something you can point to in 30 years and say that mattered." Luke nodded. "I've been thinking about that. Rebecca and I, we want to start a business. Nothing big, maybe a feed store or a hardware store. Something that serves the community, uses what I know about ranching and agriculture." "That's good. That's real good." They sat in silence. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Another answered. The eternal sounds of Texas night, unchanged by money or time, or the passage of land from one owner to another. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you regret it? Holding so long, missing out on time with Mom before she died? The stress it put on everyone, was it worth it?" Jack thought carefully before answering. "Your mother died of cancer. Nothing I did or didn't do changed that. The medical bills came regardless. The stress came regardless. The only question was whether we'd go through it broke or with a plan. We had a plan. It worked. So no, I don't regret the strategy." "That's not what I asked." "I know. You asked if it was worth it. And the answer is I don't know yet. Ask me in 20 years. Ask me when I see what you build with your share. What Ben builds with his. What the girls do with their education trusts. If this money creates opportunity for the next generation, then yes, it was worth every sleepless night. But if we just spend it and it's gone in 10 years, then no, it wasn't worth anything." The next morning, Jack drove into Liberty Hill for the last time as a rancher. Stopped at the feed store where Bob Wilson still worked the counter. Bob looked older, tired, defeated by life. "Heard you finally sold," Bob said. "I did. How much, if you don't mind me asking?" $2 million. Bob set down the pen he was holding, stared at Jack like he was seeing him for the first time. "I sold for 220. You got 10 times that." "You sold 6 years ago. Different market, number. Same market, different strategy. You held. I ran. You were patient. I was scared." Bob's voice cracked slightly. "I could have had what you have if I just held on. If I just trusted that the pattern would complete. But I took the first exit I could find, and it led nowhere." Jack felt something in his chest. Pity for his old friend, but also recognition that Bob's choice had been rational, given what he knew at the time. Most people would have made the same choice. "Bob, you made the decision that felt right. Can't beat yourself up for that." "Can I? I think about it every day. Every single day. I could have held, could have waited, could have had enough money that my grandkids would be set up. Instead, I'm 70 years old working retail for minimum wage." Jack didn't know what to say. There was no comfort that would ease that kind of regret. So he just put his hand on Bob's shoulder, squeezed once, and left. Drove home thinking about the nature of decisions, how they branch into futures, how one choice in 74 had led Bob to poverty and Jack to wealth. Same starting point, same information, different conclusions. The only difference was risk tolerance. And maybe that was the real lesson. Not that patience always wins, but that some people are constitutionally built to endure uncertainty while others aren't. Neither is better, just different. Red Patterson died in October. Heart failure, peaceful in his sleep. Jack spoke at the funeral, talked about how Red had been a mentor and friend, how he'd taught Jack to read maps and think long-term, how he'd believed in the strategy when everyone else thought it was crazy. After the service, Red's son Tom pulled Jack aside. Dad left you something in the will, said you'd understand what it meant. He handed Jack a small box. Inside was Red's old pipe in a handwritten note. Jack, by the time you read this, you'll have either succeeded or failed. If you failed, this pipe is a reminder that even smart men make mistakes, so don't be too hard on yourself. If you succeeded, this pipe is a reminder that wisdom takes time to prove itself. Either way, I was proud to know you. Smoke it and think of me once in a while. Red. Jack held the pipe, felt its weight. Smooth wood worn by decades of use. He'd never been a smoker, but he'd keep this, display it somewhere. A reminder of the man who'd believed in him when belief was hard to find. The money changed things in ways Jack hadn't anticipated. Not bad ways, just different. He didn't have to check the ranch account before buying groceries. Didn't have to calculate whether he could afford repairs. Didn't wake up at 3 in the morning, worried about property taxes. But he also didn't have purpose the way he used to. The land had given him something to fight for, something to protect. A reason to get up every morning and make decisions that mattered. Now that was gone. He bought a house in town like he'd planned. Small place, 2 bedrooms, nice yard. Moved in November. Luke and Rebecca took over the ranch house with the girls. Ben bought his 100 acres and started planning. Jack set up the education trusts. $25,000 each for Emily, Sarah, and Grace. Enough for any college, any degree, any future they wanted. Put $100,000 in conservative investments, bonds mostly, the kind that generated reliable income, and kept the rest liquid, because he didn't know what came next. Christmas of '79 was different than any Christmas before. The family gathered at Luke's house, the old Monroe ranch house, now filled with children's voices and wrapping paper and the chaos of grandchildren opening presents. Jack watched from his chair, holding a cup of coffee, feeling like a spectator in his own life. Ben's boys running around with Emily and Sarah, Grace toddling after them, Luke and Rebecca looking happy, settled, secure, Ben and his wife planning their land purchase. Everyone thriving because of a decision Jack had made 6 years ago, because he'd seen a pattern and believed in it and held through every crisis. It should have felt like victory, and it did, partially, but it also felt like an ending, like the main work of his life was done at 54 and everything after was just an epilogue. Luke found him alone on the porch later. "You okay, Dad?" "Fine." "You don't look fine, you look sad." "I am sad, but not in a bad way, more like the way you feel when something important ends. Happy it happened, sad it's over. You could buy more land, do it again." Jack shook his head. "That was my one play. The one time everything lined up perfect, my research, the timing, the willingness to suffer through the wait. I'm not going to try to catch lightning twice." "So what are you going to do?" Jack thought about it. "I think I'm going to teach, not substitute teaching, real teaching, maybe at the community college, business classes, real estate, investing, teach people how to read patterns the way Red taught me." "Think anyone will listen after what you just did? After turning 100,000 into 2 million in 6 years?" "Yeah, I think people will listen." Jack started teaching in January of 1980. Austin Community College hired him to teach 2 courses. Introduction to Real Estate Investment and Long-Term Wealth Building Strategies. 20 students each. Mostly young people in their 20s trying to figure out how to build something in a world that felt increasingly uncertain. A few older folks looking for a career change or a second act. He taught them what he'd learned, not from textbooks but from lived experience. How to read planning documents at the county clerk's office. How to attend city council meetings and understand what infrastructure projects meant for property values. How to calculate risk versus reward using actual data instead of gut feeling. How to have the discipline to hold when everyone around you is selling. But mostly he taught best patience. Taught them that wealth building wasn't about getting rich quick, wasn't about finding the secret loophole or the inside tip, was about making good decisions based on research and having the courage to let those decisions mature over time. The students were skeptical at first. This was 1980. The economy was a disaster. Interest rates had hit 20%. Paul Volcker at the Federal Reserve was strangling inflation with policies that were causing a brutal recession. Unemployment was climbing toward 10%. Everything felt uncertain, unstable, like the whole American economic project might be failing. Why should they believe in long-term investing when the short-term looked apocalyptic? Jack told them his story, showed them the documents, the maps from '73 showing where he'd calculated the highway would go, the population projections, the infrastructure bond proposals, the planning commission minutes, all of it publicly available, all of it there for anyone willing to do the work of reading and understanding. He showed them the progression of offers, 100,000 in '73, 400,000 in '75, 750 in '77, 1.3 in '78, 1.7 in '79, 2.35 at closing. A 23 times return over 6 years. Annual compounded return of 78%. Better than any stock. Better than any bond. Better than anything except the specific strategy of identifying value before the market recognized it and having the iron discipline to hold through every crisis. But I didn't get lucky, he told them. I got prepared, did the research, attended the boring meetings, read the documents nobody else wanted to read, calculated probabilities. And then I had the courage to act on what the data was telling me. The students started paying attention, started asking questions. How do you know which planning documents matter? How do you calculate probability when there's so much uncertainty? How do you hold when your family is pressuring you to sell? Jack answered each question with specifics, with examples, with the kind of granular detail that comes from actually doing something rather than theorizing about it. Word spread fast in the small world of Austin real estate. By fall semester, his classes had waiting lists of 50 students for 20 seats. Students from the University of Texas started auditing his lectures. Local real estate agents wanted to sit in. Investment club members came to take notes. Jack became a minor celebrity in Austin investment circles. The man who'd turned 100,000 into 2 million through pure discipline and research. The rancher who'd beaten professional developers at their own game. Someone from the Austin American-Statesman called, wanted to do a profile. Jack initially said no, didn't want the attention, but Luke convinced him. Dad, your story matters. It shows people that wealth isn't about luck or connections. It's about discipline and research. Let them tell it. The article ran in March of '81. Local rancher turned professor teaches the long game. The headline felt reductive, but the article got the core story right. Man sees pattern. Man does research. Man holds despite universal pressure. Man wins. Man teaches others. The article included a photo of Jack in his office at the community college, maps on the wall behind him, looking serious and professorial. He was 55 but looked 70. The 6 years of holding had aged him in ways money couldn't reverse. But in the photo, if you look closely, you could see something else. Not just age, but satisfaction. The look of a man who'd proven something to himself and was now sharing that proof with others. Ben's land purchase closed in March of '81, 100 acres south of Austin. Paid $500,000. Planned to hold 15 years. Let Austin's growth reach him the way it had reached Jack. Jack drove out to see it with him. Good land, rolling hills, creek running through. Perfect position between Austin and San Antonio along Interstate 35. You learned the lesson, Jack said. I learned it from the best. Don't hold too long. When your number hits, take it. Don't get greedy. What's my number? Only you can answer that. But make sure it's based on data, not emotion. They stood on the land, father and son, both investors now, both believers in the long game, both willing to endure short-term pain for long-term gain. I'm proud of you, Jack said, not for buying the land, for understanding why the land matters. Because it's real, because it teaches patience. And patience is the only edge most people can develop. You can't out-trade the professionals, can't out-analyze the computers, but you can outweight them. That's the edge. Luke's feed store opened in May of '81. He and Rebecca bought a building in Georgetown, renovated it, stocked it with everything a rancher or farmer might need. Feed, seed, tack, equipment, named it Monroe Agricultural Supply. The business did well from the start. Luke understood his customers because he'd been his customer, knew what they needed, knew how to price fairly, knew that relationships mattered more than margins. By year 2, they were profitable. By year 5, they had 3 locations. By year 10, Luke was wealthier from the business than he ever would have been from the land. Jack visited often, worked the counter sometimes, talked to old ranchers about cattle and crops and the way the world was changing. He was 60 now, looked 70, but felt alive in a way he hadn't since selling the land. Purpose, he realized, didn't come from money, came from work that mattered. And helping Luke build something real, that mattered. Emily started college in 1991, University of Texas, business degree. She was 18, smart, ambitious. Looked at Jack one day and said, "Grandpa, tell me the truth. Was holding the land worth it?" Jack thought carefully. "Financially, yes, absolutely. We turned 100,000 into 2 million. That set up everyone in the family." "That's not what I asked." "I know. You asked, was it worth it? All of it. The sacrifice, the stress, the years of barely surviving." And the answer is yes, because it taught me something I couldn't have learned any other way. "What's that?" "That you can trust yourself. That research and discipline can beat luck and speculation. That one person with conviction can stand against pressure from everyone and be right. I needed to prove that to myself, and I did." Emily smiled. "I'm going to remember that." She graduated in 95 with honors, got a job in real estate development, not flipping houses, strategic land acquisition. She learned from watching her grandfather, learned that the real money was in seeing what others didn't see and having the courage to act on it. Jack retired from teaching in 1998. He was 73, had taught almost 2 decades, probably influenced hundreds of students, helped them understand that wealth building was a marathon, not a sprint. Red Patterson had been right about one thing. Wisdom takes time to prove itself. Jack's wisdom had taken 6 years to prove financially, but decades to prove philosophically. That holding wasn't just about land, was about anything worth building. Relationships, businesses, skills, character. All of it required the same discipline, the same patience, the same willingness to endure short-term pain for long-term gain. Ben's land sold in 1996. He'd held 15 years, paid $500,000, sold for $3.2 million. Better return than Jack had gotten, because Ben had learned the lesson and applied it with even more discipline. Ben used the money to buy more land, kept playing the game, kept holding and waiting and reading patterns. By 2000, Ben was wealthier than Jack had ever been, all because he'd watched his father hold through impossible circumstances and learned that impossible was just a word people used when they lacked patience. Luke's business kept growing. By 2000, Monroe Agricultural Supply had 8 locations, employed 60 people, generated $2 million a year in revenue. Luke was 50, looked 40, had more energy than men half his age. He'd taken his share of the land money and turned it into something bigger than land, had built something that served people, created jobs, made a difference. That's what the money was for, Jack realized. Not to spend, not to hoard, but to use as a platform for building something meaningful. Jack Monroe turned 80 in 2005. The family threw a party at Luke's house, the old Monroe ranch house where Jack had lived through the hardest years. 3 generations gathered, children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. 60 people total, all connected to Jack by blood or marriage or the choices he'd made 50 years ago. Emily and Sarah and Grace were there, all grown women now. Emily was 38, successful real estate investor, had taken Jack's lessons and built her own fortune. Sarah was 36, finishing her residency in internal medicine at Dell Medical School. Grace was 34, teaching 5th grade, shaping young minds the way Jack had shaped hers. Ben's boys were in their 30s, both successful in ways that didn't require land. One was a software engineer at Dell. The other ran a construction company. Both had used their inheritance wisely, built lives that mattered. Luke's feed store empire had grown to 12 locations across Central Texas. Monroe Agricultural Supply employed over 100 people now, served thousands of farmers and ranchers, made a real difference in the community. And Jack sat in the middle of it all, an old man who'd made one perfect decision and watched it compound across generations into something bigger than money, into opportunity, into legacy, into proof that discipline and patience could create ripples that lasted beyond one lifetime. Someone asked him to give a speech. Jack's granddaughter, Emily, probably. She'd organized the party, coordinated everything, made sure everyone who mattered was there. Jack stood slowly, feeling his 80 years. The knee he'd injured in '71 still ached. His back hurt from decades of ranch work. His hands were gnarled from arthritis. But his mind was sharp and his voice was steady. 63 years ago, he began, I came back from Vietnam to a country that didn't quite know what to do with its veterans. I took over my father's ranch. It was struggling. I was broke. The future seemed impossible to imagine, much less plan for. He paused, gathering his thoughts. Everyone was quiet, listening. Then my father died in 1972. Heart attack while fixing fence. 71 years old, worked himself to death on land that barely sustained him. I was 47, suddenly responsible for 420 acres and decisions I didn't feel ready to make. Then Linda got cancer. 14 months of watching her fade. Medical bills that destroyed our savings. She died in '73. I was 48, widowed, broke, raising 2 boys, trying to figure out how to keep going. And then I had to make a choice. He looked around the room at all the faces watching him. His children, his grandchildren, his great-grandchildren. All of them here because of what happened next. A developer named Kellerman offered me $100,000 for the ranch. Everyone told me to take it, said I was crazy not to. And maybe I was crazy, because I looked at that offer and I saw something nobody else saw. I saw that it wasn't enough. Not because I was greedy, but because I'd done research. I'd read planning documents. I'd attended city council meetings at night after working the ranch all day. I'd studied traffic patterns and population projections and infrastructure development plans. And I'd calculated that the land was worth more than anyone realized. Not yet, but soon. So I said no, and for the next 6 years, I held. Jack's voice grew stronger, more intense. 6 years of poverty. 6 years of everyone in 3 counties thinking I was a fool. 6 years of barely surviving. Of selling cattle we needed to keep. Of eating beans and rice because that's all we could afford. Of watching equipment break and not having money to fix it properly. Of lying awake at night wondering if I'd destroyed my family chasing something that didn't exist. But here's what I learned during those 6 years. I learned that courage isn't about not being scared. It's about being terrified every single day and moving forward anyway. I learned that discipline isn't about never wanting to quit. It's about wanting to quit every day and choosing not to. I learned that patience isn't passive. It's the hardest work you'll ever do. He looked directly at his grandchildren. Everyone wants a secret to wealth, some trick or insider knowledge. But there is no secret. There's only this. Do your research. Study what others ignore. Read the boring documents. Attend the tedious meetings. Learn to see patterns before they're obvious. And then, this is the hard part, have the courage to act on what you know and the discipline to hold through every crisis. Because here's the truth nobody wants to hear. The world will tell you you're wrong. Your family will pressure you. Your friends will doubt you. Your own mind will scream at you to quit. And you have to hold anyway. Not because holding is always right, but because if you've done real research, if you understand real data, if you've calculated real probabilities, then holding is the only rational choice, even when it feels insane. Jack paused, took a sip of water, continued. We turned a $100,000 opportunity into $2,350,000. 23 times return over 6 years. That money set up this family, sent you all to college, let Luke build his business, let Ben buy land and do the same thing I did. Let Emily become the investor she became. But here's what matters more than the money. The lesson. The proof that one person with conviction can stand against universal pressure and win. That research beats guessing. That discipline beats desperation. That courage beats consensus. That's what I want you to remember. Not the 2 million, but the 6 years of holding. The refusal to quit when quitting looked rational. The courage to wait when waiting was torture. He looked at Emily specifically. Some of you have asked me over the years if it was worth it, if the sacrifice was justified, if I'd do it again, knowing what I know now. And the answer is complicated. The financial outcome was worth it. Obviously, we won. We succeeded beyond what most people achieve in 10 lifetimes. But the cost was real too. I aged 20 years in those 6 years. I put stress on my family that still hurts to remember. I gambled with security when security was scarce. I could have been wrong. If the highway had gone a different route, if Intel had chosen Phoenix, if any of 1,000 variables had broken differently, we'd have lost everything. So was it worth it? I think that's the wrong question. The right question is, did I have a choice? Could I have looked at the data, seen the pattern, calculated the probability, and then done nothing? Could I have taken the safe money and spent the rest of my life wondering what if? No, I couldn't have, because I'm built a certain way. Built to see patterns and trust them. Built to endure uncertainty if the expected value is positive. Built to hold when holding is hard. Not everyone is built this way. Most people aren't. And that's okay. The world needs people who take the safe path, who build steady lives, who don't gamble on uncertain futures. But some of us can't do that. Some of us see the pattern and we have to follow it wherever it leads, even if it leads through hell, even if everyone says we're crazy, even if we might be wrong. Jack's voice softened. I was lucky in one way. I was right. The pattern held. The gamble paid off. But I want you to understand something important. Being right doesn't make it not gambling. I gambled. I won. But it was still a gamble. So here's my final lesson. If you're going to gamble, if you're going to bet everything on a pattern you see, make sure you've done the work to earn the right to that conviction. Don't gamble on hunches. Don't gamble on hope. Gamble on research, on data, on patterns you've studied until you understand them better than anyone else. And then when you've done that work, when you've earned your conviction, have the courage to act on it. Have the discipline to hold through the doubt. Have the patience to let time prove you right or wrong. Because in the end, that's all any of us can do. See clearly, act courageously, hold patiently, and accept whatever outcome follows. Jack sat down. The room was silent for several long seconds. Then Luke started clapping. Then Ben. Then everyone joined in, standing, applauding not just for the speech, but for the life it represented. Emily had tears running down her face. Sarah was wiping her eyes. Grace was smiling through emotion. They weren't just applauding an old man's words. They were applauding a strategy that had worked, a bet that had paid off, a man who'd seen the future before anyone else and had the courage to claim it. Jack Monroe died in 2008 at age 83. Peaceful in his sleep, he'd lived to see his great-grandchildren, had lived to see his strategy validated not just financially but philosophically. At the funeral, Emily spoke. She was 38 now, successful real estate investor, mother of 3, standing in front of 200 people who'd come to honor her grandfather. Grandpa Jack used to tell me that everyone gets one perfect moment in life, one chance to make a decision that defines everything after. Most people miss their moment. They're not paying attention, or they're too scared, or they don't have the discipline to act. But Grandpa saw his moment, saw it clearly, and he had the courage to hold through 6 years of everyone calling him a fool, had the discipline to trust his research when research was all he had the patience to wait for $2 million when everyone said, take whatever you can get. She looked at the casket. That's who he was, not just a rancher or an investor or a teacher. He was a man who saw the future before it arrived and had the courage to bet everything on his vision. We're all here because of that courage, because he refused to quit, because he held when holding was hardest. That's his legacy, not money, courage. And we'll carry that forward every day, every decision, every moment when we have to choose between the easy path and the right path. We'll remember Grandpa Jack, the man who held. The casket was buried in the Liberty Hill Cemetery next to Linda. The headstone was simple. Jack Monroe, 1925 to 2008. He held. 4 words, but they said everything. 10 years after Jack's death, Emily stood on a piece of land she'd bought in Kyle, Texas, 20 miles from where her grandfather's ranch had been. She'd paid $2 million for 80 acres. Was holding, waiting for Austin's growth to reach her. She thought about Jack often, thought about his maps and calculations and patient discipline, thought about how he'd taught her that the real edge wasn't information, was courage. The courage to see a pattern and believe in it, the courage to hold when everyone said sell, the courage to trust yourself when no one else trusted you. She looked at the land rolling away toward the horizon. Austin was growing, development was spreading, the pattern was repeating. And Emily Monroe, granddaughter of Jack Monroe, was ready to hold, just like he'd taught her, just like he'd shown 3 generations. Hold through the doubt, hold through the pressure, hold through the impossible, hold until the world catches up. Because in the end, patience always wins. Always. The end.